Chapter 420. Jiang, do you really not need us to go with you? Looking at Jiang Hai, who was packing his luggage, Moses Adams couldn't help but whisper to Jiang Hai. He was really worried that Jiang Hai would go back like this. Is his safety guaranteed? Don't worry, Azalina is with me. Nothing will happen. Shaking his head, Jiang Hai said to Moses Adams. Last night, after receiving a call from Qi Li and confirming who his enemy was, Jiang Hai was ready to set off today. Jiang Hai was never a good person. Generally, he would take revenge on the spot. If the other party ran too far away, then he would take revenge as early as possible. 10 years is not too late for a gentleman to take revenge, but Jiang Hai takes revenge from morning to night. So this time, he was ready to go today and come back early. As for the others, Jiang Hai didn't plan to move. Robbins and the others needed to take care of the ranch, Ai Dahua, and the others needed to take care of the fishing ground, and even Aphrodite and the others needed to take care of the winery. Moses Adams had more things to do. He needed to deal with the tourism in Winthrop Town, and he also needed to deal with the problem of those people. Jiang Hai said that he wouldn't let them come out after they went in, and he really had to do it. People like him are the most trustworthy. It's not that he doesn't have compassion, but it depends on who it is for. Jiang, let's go together. Looking at Jiang Hai, who was packing his things, Daliana and Marian also stood up. To be honest, the two girls were a little worried that no one would take care of their nominal father. Oh, that's fine too. Hearing Daliana and Marian's words, Jiang Hai froze for a moment. Then he thought about it. Now that these two girls have been adopted by him for a while, it's time to take them back to see what Huaxia is like. After all, this was his home. Although his daughter was not related by blood, he should at least know. As for the danger, Jiang Hai was not worried. The country was not a tiger's den. This time, Azalina was there, so he did not need to worry too much. As for the two of them, he could protect them. Jiang, although I don't know why you're going to Huaxia this time, I feel that you might get into some trouble. If I can't leave here, you can take Penelope with you. After hearing that Jiang Hai was going to take Delina and Marian, Moses Adams hesitated for a second before telling Jiang Hai. After hearing his words, Jiang Hai became stunned for a second. Penelope was Penelope Daller, Burke Daller's daughter. Jiang Hai had met her several times, but it was not a pleasant meeting. Therefore, Jiang Hai did not know much about this woman. But as Moses Adams said, with Jiang Hai's current identity, he could not avoid some trouble. It was still very useful to have a lawyer with him. Besides, it was just one more person, so he did not care. Okay, then I'll take her. During my absence, you have to take care of my manor. Hearing Moses Adams' words, Jiang Hai hesitated for a moment, then nodded hard. Seeing that Jiang Hai agreed, Moses Adams was relieved. Then he called Penelope Daller. When she came, Jiang Hai also packed up the things he was going to take. It was convenient to have money. He did not need to bring too many things back to China. A few pairs of underwear, a change of clothes, and a mobile phone charger. That was all. He did not need to bring anything else, because he could buy them at any time in China. Things that could be bought in the United States could also be bought in China. It was just that the price was cheap and expensive. However, Jiang Hai was not short of money, probably because of Jiang Hai's temperament. The three girls who were going to go with him did not bring too many things. For people in 4 bags, that was all. At the same time, Jiang Hai called the American Express. Don't forget, he was a Centurion Black Gold VIP with hundreds of millions of savings. If he wanted to book a ticket, he could book it at any time and any place. He booked 5 first-class tickets to the capital as soon as possible, and then he waited for Penelope Daller's arrival. Fortunately, this woman was also very capable. She quickly packed up her things and drove over. When she saw Burke Daller again, she was really at a loss. To be honest, she now believed that her father could make a lot of money with Jiang Hai, because her father had given her a lot of money. Although she didn't want the money and wanted to return it to her father didn't care, because he had already proved that he could also make a lot of money in the way of raising cattle with his own ability. Therefore, when she looked at Jiang Hai now, she was not as hostile as before. Instead, she was a little embarrassed. Now that everyone is here, let's go. Seeing that Penelope had also come, Jiang Hai said this, and then drove his shield to the New York airport. There was no direct flight to Huaxia in Boston. Instead of waiting at the Boston airport to get on the plane to New York, it was better to drive there directly. To be honest, it was much faster than taking a plane. A few hours later, Jiang Hai and the others arrived at the New York airport. After parking the car in the airport parking lot, Jiang Hai took the four beauties into the airport's VIP waiting room. After a short while, a special flight attendant came to remind him that it was time to board the plane. Since Jiang Hai spent so much money, the plane he took naturally would not be bad. With the best plane and the most expensive ticket, not only did Jiang Hai and the others have an independent space where they can lie down or sit, each person has a seat, but the plane also has a network, which is directly connected to the satellite. They can use it to surf the internet or play games to pass the time. Of course, the speed is definitely not fast. At the same time, everyone had a separate TV that could play movies and the like. Of course, there were also separate places like the Sky Bar, where they could not drink and play, but to gather and chat together. However, Jiang Hai had never been there before. He was only one person, so why would he go there? Of course, this was only unique to first-class flights. Ordinary economy and business cabins did not have it. Moreover, they could order food, drink, and even have a separate space. There was a row of bunks like the upper, middle, and lower bunks on the train to sleep. Of course, in fact, these bunks were not very comfortable, especially for people who were too big. Jiang Hai was obviously familiar with this plane. After all, he had sat in this plane 4 times. However, the other women were still a little scared of this luxurious first-class cabin. But Delina and Marian were still fine. Azalina and Penelope, on the other hand, had been looking around curiously ever since they boarded the plane. Not long after, the flight attendant came over and indicated that they were ready to take off. In the United States, different airlines had different requirements. Some airlines required that the plane be turned off when taking off and landing, but it could be used in the air, but it had to be in flight mode. Some airlines could directly turn on flight mode to use mobile phones in the air, and there was no need to turn off the phone. This was because the interference wave emitted by mobile phones only interfered with the base station on the ground, and it had nothing to do with the plane. Unlike in China, as long as you get on the plane, you are not allowed to use your mobile phone. Flight mode, in fact, was not useful in China. Now, Jiang Hai and the others were sitting in the plane. They were not allowed to turn on their mobile phones during takeoff and landing. Therefore, the flight attendant came over and gestured for everyone to turn off their phones. But just as everyone was about to turn off their phones, a voice came from Jiang Hai's side. Everyone looked over and saw a very fat guy talking loudly on the phone. "Hey, you can rest assured. I'm on the plane now. I'll arrive in the capital tomorrow. When the time comes, I'll help you return those things. Don't worry, the goods I sell will definitely not be a loss to you." Listening to him talking, the people next to him couldn't help but frown. They had to admit that in foreign countries, these Europeans and Americans didn't have a good first impression of Huaxia. Just like now, under the repeated reminders of the flight attendant, the fat guy turned off his mobile phone, but his face was slightly embarrassed. After making sure that he turned off his mobile phone, the flight attendant left his position and prepared to take off. After the fat guy watched the flight attendant leave, he couldn't help but turn his head to Jiang Hai's side. "Hey, buddy, I said that this old American plane is strict enough. They even watched me turn off my mobile phone." Listening to the other party's words, Jiang Hai couldn't help but laugh. If you weren't so ignorant, why would they watch you turn off your mobile phone? But what surprised Jiang Hai even more was how this guy concluded that he was Huaxia. "How do you know that I am Huaxia?" Looking at the fat guy, Jiang Hai asked strangely. "Hey, Huaxia people have a sense of righteousness." Hearing his words, Jiang Hai chuckled. What kind of righteousness is this? These words were just to fool them. Those little Qing, he wasn't young anymore. Would these words work on him? Well, actually, when you turned off your mobile phone, it showed simplified Chinese. "Let me introduce myself. My name is Wang Yang. I am in the jewelry business. You can call me Fatty Wang. Brother, where did you get rich?" Seeing Jiang Hai's gaze, The guy named Fatty Wong smiled embarrassedly, but thinking that there was still a 13-hour flight, he would suffocate if he didn't speak. My name is Jiang Hai. I opened a manor in Boston to raise cattle. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai also chuckled and said indifferently, he now likes to say that he raises cattle or fish. As for whether this will make others look down on him, Jiang Hai doesn't care. He doesn't live in the eyes of others. They can think whatever they want. What does it have to do with Jiang Hai? Raising cattle? It seems that the manor should be large. However, Fatty Wong did not laugh at Jiang Hai, but said with a smile. Chapter 421. Hearing the fat man's words, Jiang Hai couldn't help but laugh. How did he see through it? How did you know? Looking at the fat man, Jiang Hai couldn't help but turn around and said with a serious face, the two girls behind you came with you, right? Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the fat man couldn't help but point at Daliana and Marian, who happened to be sitting behind Jiang Hai with his mouth, and said with a smirk on his face, both of them are my daughters. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai also glanced back and didn't find any expensive clothes on Daliana and Marian. These two were the same as Jiang Hai. They usually didn't recognize any brands. As long as they thought the clothes looked good, they would buy them. They weren't people who would change themselves because of clothes. So while their clothes weren't cheap, they weren't luxury goods either. Each piece of clothing cost around $100, which wasn't cheap when converted to RMB. But in the United States, this price was indeed not expensive. Now the clothes they were wearing were a loose chiffon top and a pair of tight jeans, which showed off their long legs. They were wearing a pair of flat canvas sneakers. It was very simple, but Jiang Hai hated wearing sneakers the most. On the contrary, they liked it very much. Just from the way they were dressed, it was really hard to tell that these two girls were rich. Oh, I don't know what clothes they are wearing, but I am a gem merchant. The bracelets they are wearing are not cheap. They can be sold for 100 or 200,000 yuan in China. Looking at Jiang Hai, Fatty Wong said excitedly. Sure enough, when Jiang Hai looked back, he found that the diamond bracelets on the wrists of the two girls were still shining. This bracelet was given to them by Chi Li. Maybe women are naturally interested in shiny things. Therefore, both Delina and Marian liked this bracelet very much. However, they were usually reluctant to wear it. They only wore it today when they went out. However, compared to their clothes, this bracelet was indeed a bit too flashy. The main diamond of this bracelet seems to be above 70 points because of the fiery color, and the other diamonds are above 30 points because of the light. The connection should be platinum, which was specially designed, so the price of this bracelet is definitely not cheap. Facing Jiang Hai, the fat man said with a serious face. He had to admit that this world was really full of experts. If you asked Jiang Hai to understand this, he wouldn't understand it. But this Fatty Wong did know these things very well. Diamonds were mainly about 4C. But when the other 3 Cs were about the same, the last 3 Cs, weight, was the most important thing. Diamonds that were less than 30 points were really not necessary to be used as ring faces or the like. Among the diamonds, only when the diameter of a single diamond was more than 4.5 millimeters and the weight was more than 0.3 carats could it show a strong light, that is to say, it could dazzle people. When it reached 70 points, that was more than 0.7 carats, it would show a fiery color. Jiang Hai didn't know what a fiery color was, he just heard these people talking about it, that's all. It seems that you know a lot about these things. Why did you come to the United States this time? Listening to Fatty Wong's endless speech, Jiang Hai also nodded. He did learn something. Anyway, he had nothing to do here, so he asked him this question. I'm a jewelry dealer. I specialize in running back and forth between Western countries and our country to make some money. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Fatty Wong said that Westerners and Easterners had different aesthetic standards, and they liked different things. In addition to gold, which everyone liked, there was a saying in China that gold had a price, but jade had no price. So in China, the real value was jade, and in foreign countries it was gemstones. Fatty Wong's job was to get some gemstones in China, sell them in the United States or Europe, and then get some jade from Europe and the United States, and sell them in China. Although this thing was not produced in China, the best jade was naturally in Southeast Asia. However, it was not that there were no mines in Europe and the United States, but this thing could not be sold at a high price locally. It was naturally the best result for him to buy it. In the following time, he began to popularize the relationship between gemstones and jade to Jiang Hai. Among the 5 most precious gemstones in the world, the most expensive one was of course diamonds. Colored diamonds of more than 5 carats could not be seen in physical stores, and could only be seen in auction houses. Thinking back, Jiang Hai had made a fortune with colored diamonds. In addition to diamonds, the second most expensive gemstone was ruby, the third was sapphire, the fourth was beryl, and the fifth was gold and emerald. Of course, the lower the price, the cheaper it was. For example, a recently famous ruby ring called Burmese Starlight weighed 19 carats and was encrusted with diamonds. The reference price was only $45,000. A 19-carat diamond could not be bought even with a zero behind it. Rubies were mainly divided into Burmese red, Mozambique red, and starlight red. Among them, pigeon blood red, the best one in Burmese red, was $6,000 per carat. Mozambique red was more expensive, and those above 3 carats could even be sold for $18,000 per carat. It was really famous in Europe. Starlight red was the cheapest. A carat was between $700 and $1,400, and the best one could hardly be sold for $3,200 per carat. Of course, in Jiang Hai's view, these things were almost the same. The sapphire, beryl, and gold and emerald were cheaper. Sapphire and the like were also produced in China, and the price was not high. Is yours gold and emerald too? Listening to Fatty Wong's introduction for a long time, Jiang Hai also looked at his wrist, where he also wore a string of chains, but this string of chains was colorful, with red, yellow, blue, green, and all kinds of colors. Seeing this guy talking so enthusiastically, Jiang Hai could not help but ask him, "Oh no, mine is tourmaline." Fatty Wong heard Jiang Hai's words and said to him with a smile, "Tourmaline?" Hearing his words, Jiang Hai was stunned again. What the hell is tourmaline? Tourmaline is still very valuable in our country. Of course, it is far worse than the 5 gems above. It was not valuable originally. In 10 years, it was sold for 400 renminbi per gram. It was a gram, not a carat. But in recent years, it is said that the Empress Dowager of the Qing dynasty liked this thing very much, so the price doubled. Now the best one is sold for tens of thousands of RMB per gram. I came here this time mainly to buy this thing. Seeing that Jiang Hai did not understand, Fatty Wong said again, "Speaking of tourmaline, this kind of thing was really worthless. Before the Ming dynasty, this kind of thing should have no value at all. But in the Qing dynasty, at first it was worn by the officials. It was often seen in TV series before. When the emperor was angry, he said that he would take off the official's crown. The crown referred to this kind of thing. In the later period, because Cixi liked it, it was also very popular among the nobles of the Qing dynasty. But this thing was produced everywhere in the world, except in Huaxia. It could be sold for some historical reasons, but it was not valuable abroad. This thing was produced in Kenya, China, Madagascar, Mozambique, Namibia, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Italy, the United States, Burma, Brazil, and some countries in South America. Huaxia, Xinjiang, Nanyuan, Mongolia, and other provinces also produced it, and the output was not small. So it was not realistic to expect it to be sold at the same price as diamonds. So abroad, this thing was worth more than $10 per gram. But in China, as long as the quality was good, dozens of US dollars would be worth at least 2 zeros. Hearing this, Jiang Hai could not help but be surprised. He did not expect these things to be so valuable. This is the green ghost in the tourmaline. If I sell it in China, it will be worth hundreds of thousands of US dollars. But I buy it in the United States. It only costs 1,000 US dollars, and it is still good. Looking at the shocked expression on Jiang Hai's face, the fat man didn't show off his wealth. Instead, he proudly showed it off. He took out a dark green zodiac symbol that he always wore on his chest and showed it to Jiang Hai. To put it bluntly, he was not afraid that Jiang Hai would do this business, because this kind of business was not something that anyone could do. First of all, You had to have a place to buy these things in the United States. Because Americans did not like these things, there were no stores on the streets of the United States. You had to go to some places of origin and talk to their bosses. Secondly, these things had to go through customs, which required a lot of procedures. Entering customs, especially the customs of Huaxia, not only did it require procedures, but also someone above. Otherwise, just the tax alone would make you lose a lot. This was also a very realistic thing. Otherwise, not everyone could do it. Therefore, Fatty Wang did not care to show off these things to Jiang Hai, and Jiang Hai naturally would not give up his manner to do such a business. But when he looked at these gems, his mind suddenly flashed. He remembered that he seemed to have seen such gems before, just in the sea of his manor. If it was a mineral vein, then wouldn't he be rich again? He had to admit that sometimes when fortune came, money could not be stopped even if he wanted to. If it was really a tourmaline mine, it was definitely not worth much in the United States, but if it was calculated according to the domestic price, TSK. Thinking of this, Jiang Hai's eyes could not help but shine. It seemed that he had opened up another branch business. While chatting with Fatty Wang casually, the plane flew quickly towards the capital. After sleeping unknowingly, the more than 10 hours of flight was officially over. As the plane landed smoothly at the capital airport, Jiang Hai, who was sitting in the chair, could not help but stretch. Tourmaline or something, he would not think about it for the time being. Since he was already here, someone should be unlucky. That guy actually dared to play dirty with him. Jiang Hai would play him to death. Chapter 422. Woo! As the plane whistled and landed on the runway of the Imperial Capital Airport, two people were standing there anxiously at the pickup aisle, looking at these two people. Originally, other people who came to pick them up would glance at them from time to time. The men looked at them, because these two women are really beautiful. They are really tall and have long legs. Coupled with their office lady clothes, they look extremely attractive. If it weren't for the innate cold appearance of these two women, there would definitely be a lot of people coming to hit on them. Even so, from time to time, there will be a person who will take the initiative to walk past them and take a look at them. At the same time, he will show off his masculine body, trying to get the phone number of these two women. But unfortunately, these two women have no interest in other people around them. As for the women who looked at these two people, they have different thoughts. Some people are secretly cursing these two vixens in their hearts. Some people are envious of the clothes they are wearing, the jewelry they are wearing, and the bags they are carrying. Because in the eyes of these gold diggers, the things on these two women add up to almost 1 million. 1 million is just a thought. Just when the men were in love, and the women were jealous, they saw the plane they have been waiting for a long time officially landing. Seeing this, the faces of the two women became more anxious. They looked at the exit with a serious face, waiting for the arrival of the group of people they are going to pick up. It has to be said that sometimes, there will always be some people who feel good about themselves. Looking at these two women, other people can feel the cold aura on their bodies. They are clearly not here to make friends, but there are always some people who are exceptions. Hey beauty, add me on WeChat. Just when the two of them were anxiously looking at the international exit, a slightly flirtatious voice came from the side. Then, a guy with a slick face flashed in front of the two of them, and said with a confident face, "Get lost." But unfortunately, these two people don't have time to pay attention to him now. The leader of the two women said with a cold face, "Hey, stop pretending, let's make friends." However, that person clearly has no intention of retreating. Instead, he continued to stand there, and said with a smirk on his face, "Obviously, this guy has been flirting with girls for a long time. He won't back down just because of this sentence. I'll say it again. Get lost." Looking at this guy, the woman in front of him couldn't help but frown. Her face turned cold, but the man in front of her didn't care, and continued to talk. "Let me introduce myself. My name is Dong Shanha, and my father is Dong XX from XX province. Does it sound familiar? My father is the richest man in our province, and he is also a member of the National People's Congress. This time, he is going abroad for business, and I am here to pick him up. But if the two of you want to get to know my father, I can introduce you to him. But after you meet him, you have to accompany me to have some fun. The greasy-haired fella said with a smile, as he looked at the two women before him. Upon hearing his words, the expressions of the two women turned even uglier. They really hadn't looked at the almanac recently. They really met all kinds of people. Just when they were being pestered by this guy, and had no way to leave, the figure they had been waiting for a long time finally came out of the exit. But to their surprise, there were 4 women who came out with him. Yes, the people who came out were none other than Jiang Hai and the others. And the people waiting for Jiang Hai were none other than Qi Li and her assistant. When she saw Jiang Hai come out, Qi Li immediately waved her arm at Jiang Hai, but Jiang Hai acted as if he didn't see it, and left from another exit. Looking at Jiang Hai's appearance, Qi Li couldn't help but be speechless. She subconsciously wanted to chase after him, but the man in front of her blocked her way. Get lost. Qi Li said this word for the 3rd time. In addition to anxiousness, there was already some anger in her eyes. I won't, otherwise, you can add me on WeChat, and I will let you go. Looking at Qi Li's flustered and exasperated look, the man said with a complacent look, as if he had already eaten Qi Li. But unfortunately, he thought that Qi Li was too harmless. Looking at the man in front of her, Qi Li went up and kicked this guy's calf heavily. In an instant, this guy held his leg and tilted to the side. Qi Li also took her assistant and ran quickly to Jiang Hai, and finally stopped Jiang Hai at the exit. Ha, Jiang Hai, did you see me just now? You saw me, and you still want to leave? Looking at Jiang Hai, Qi Li said with some gasps, and hearing her words, Jiang Hai also looked at her calmly. Oh, I saw you, but weren't you talking to that kid? Who is that kid? Your new boyfriend? Looking at the guy who was still holding his leg and jumping in the distance, Jiang Hai said calmly. Yeah, Jiang Hai, I only have you as my husband, no matter if you believe it or not. Oh, forget it, let's go back first, okay? Looking at Jiang Hai's stubborn look, Qi Li was really going crazy. How can this guy be so stubborn? But now is not the time to talk about this. So Qi Li pulled Jiang Hai and wanted to leave first. Oh, we have already booked the hotel, and the hotel car should be outside. However, Qi Li pulled Jiang Hai, but she didn't move. Jiang Hai just stood there, and continued to say indifferently, do we have to be like this between us? Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Qi Li couldn't help but tremble. She looked at Jiang Hai's eyes with a serious face, and said word by word. Jiang Hai's current attitude really made her feel that she was going crazy. There doesn't seem to be any relationship between us. Oh, a cooperative relationship. Looking at Qi Li, Jiang Hai said calmly, well, you can say what kind of relationship it is. If you don't want to go home with me, you can go to the hotel. But you can't be naive to think that you can solve in Changwu by coming here yourself. You still need my help. Looking at Jiang Hai, Qi Li said with a serious face. She was really speechless with Jiang Hai. This guy is a stone in the toilet, smelly and hard. Forget it. What if you help your first love at the critical moment? Then wouldn't I be digging my own grave? Hearing Qi Li's words, Jiang Hai smiled, then shook his head, directly bypassed Qi Li and walked out. Looking at Jiang Hai's appearance, Qi Li really opened her mouth wide this time. But she didn't know what to say. President Qi, what should we do now? Seeing Jiang Hai walking out, Qi Li's assistant asked Qi Li with a face full of grievances. She was complaining for Qi Li, because she knew that Qi Li and Changwu didn't have any relationship. It was not an exaggeration to say that they were like fire and water now. But Jiang Hai's attitude towards Qi Li really made her feel that it was not worth it for Qi Li. Let's go and follow him. Feeling her assistant's emotions, Qi Li took a deep breath. After suppressing the trace of unhappiness in her heart, she took the initiative to follow Jiang Hai out of the airport. She got into the car and followed Jiang Hai's car all the way to the city. The car drove by the Peninsula Hotel to pick them up. The hotel Jiang Hai checked in this time was the Peninsula Hotel, near the prince's mansion in the center of the capital. This hotel was a hotel in Hong Kong, and it was a good place in the neighborhood. Jiang Hai booked a total of 4 suites here. One for himself, one for Delina and Marian, one for Azalina, and one for Penelope Doll who followed them. After arriving at the hotel, They got their keys and went straight upstairs. After telling the four girls that he would treat them to a meal later, Jiang Hai went back to his room to take a shower and relax. But before he took off his clothes, someone knocked on his door. He opened the door and found that the person standing in front of him was none other than Qi Li. "Why did you follow me here?" Looking at Qi Li, Jiang Hai was stunned. She was very different from the President Qi in his impression, who could not bear any grievance. His tone was so harsh, so she should have gone back long ago. "I don't care what you say, but I have to say it clearly. I don't care what you think. I have to make it clear that in Zhongwu and I used to be friends, but nothing happened between us. You know what happened after we returned to China? He and I are enemies now, and I can't wait to bite him to death. What happened to you this time was indeed because of me. But no matter what, now our opponents are the same. An enemy's enemy is a friend. I think we should unite instead of arguing with me like this." Looking at Jiang Hai, Qi Li directly pushed Jiang Hai aside and walked into Jiang Hai's room. As soon as the door was closed, she said to Jiang Hai excitedly. Looking at her state, Jiang Hai was stunned. "I think you have misunderstood. First, I didn't argue with you because you said that except for the current status of husband and wife, I am basically a stranger. Oh no, a business partner because you are still buying my beef. Second, I don't care what the relationship between you and Zhongwu is. I only know that he wants to mess with me, so I will mess him up. And most importantly, I can't believe that the relationship between us will make you stand on my side. After all, you used to be so close to him." Looking at Qi Li, Jiang Hai slowly stretched out his hand and said what he wanted to say. "Why are you so stubborn? I left you in Bing City and did not care about you. It's my fault. I already know that I'm in the wrong. I've already gone to Boston to look for you. Did I say anything about you messing around with so many women outside? I still have to help you take care of them in the capital. Have you ever thought about me? Why am I so aggrieved? For you, not for your stupid cow." Seeing Jiang Hai being so heartless, Qi Li finally couldn't help shouting at Jiang Hai. Chapter 423. Looking at the crazy Qi Li in front of him, Jiang Hai couldn't help but be at a loss for words. In fact, in his opinion, a breakup between him and Qi Li was inevitable. After all, this meant that the old him died, and the new him was reborn. So, from the beginning, he didn't intend to have too much interaction with Qi Li, because the two of them were not the same kind of people. And to be honest, he didn't consider the problem of whether Feng Yinshen and Ai Xiaoxi needed protection in the country, because if they couldn't survive, they could just go to his place. He couldn't be more happy. But now that Qi Li said this, Jiang Hai didn't know what to say. He didn't know when it started. Maybe it was after he saved her from the mountain lion's mouth, but her indifferent feelings towards him seemed to have gradually changed. She might have feelings for him. Jiang Hai also thought about it before, but as soon as it popped up, he erased it. After all, he had always been very dull when it came to feelings. He didn't want to think too much about it. After all, he fell on this woman's body before, and it was quite painful. Previously, it was said more than once that Jiang Hai was a timid person. As long as someone hurt him once, he would never get close to her again in his life. It didn't matter if he was narrow-minded or not. This was Jiang Hai, a living Jiang Hai. His way of protecting himself was to use violence to curb violence. When violence couldn't achieve his goal, he would stay away from the other party. But now, in front of him, Qi Li threw this confession in his face. It was Jiang Hai's turn to be embarrassed. In short, you can't just go to him like this. We still need to think about it. The country is different from foreign countries. There are too many implications in doing things. Pulling out a carrot will not only create a hole, but it may also create a field. The network of relationships is too complicated. If you just jump in rashly, you will suffer. Looking at Jiang Hai's embarrassment, Qi Li's face couldn't help but blush. After her outburst, her mentality calmed down a lot. She took a deep breath, and then slowly began to speak to Jiang Hai. She knew that only at this time, Jiang Hai would listen to her. Once it's done, I'll leave. At worst, I won't come back in the future. Looking at Qi Li, Jiang Hai said calmly, "You can't leave just because you want to. The Yin family's power is much more powerful than you think. Don't be fooled by the fact that they only run a restaurant. If they want to do business safely in the capital, there must be a lot of big shots above them, especially in restaurants. They have too many connections with people from all walks of life. Maybe the moment you make a move, they will have already canceled your passport. Where can you go by then? Looking at Jiang Hai, Qili said seriously. When Jiang Hai heard her words, he couldn't help but be a little speechless. Suddenly, he felt that he seemed to have brought too many people. He should have only brought Azalina here. If something happens, she naturally has the ability to protect herself, and Jiang Hai can directly go into the sea and tame a shark or something. Then he can swim back to the United States. But now he has Delina, Marian and Penelope Doll with him. If something really happens, it will be a very troublesome thing for him. It's getting late, let's go for a meal. Seeing that Jiang Hai seemed to really listen to her, Qili couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. As long as Jiang Hai listened to her, it was a good thing for her. At least Jiang Hai wouldn't be in danger. At the same time, she also felt that the relationship between her and Jiang Hai was slowly moving forward. Phew, let's go, I'll call them. Let's have a buffet downstairs. Such a 5-star hotel naturally had a buffet. For the average working-class family, spending more than 200 yuan per person for a meal was indeed a rather inappropriate thing to do. For example, Jiang Hai's group of 6, oh no, and Qili's assistant, that's 7 people, adding up to more than 1,000 yuan. But for Jiang Hai, more than 200 yuan per person is actually not expensive, especially with his current wealth. My family runs a restaurant. What are you eating here for? Let's go to the restaurant. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Qili glanced at Jiang Hai. It's not that she doesn't want Jiang Hai to spend this money. With their wealth, they really don't care about 1,000 or 800 yuan. However, Jiang Hai's first meal back in China is not in her family's restaurant, which makes her somewhat uncomfortable. Hearing Qili's words, Jiang Hai also nodded. Since she said so, then let's go. Then he called the other 4 girls. The 4 girls were a little surprised that Jiang Hai and Qili were standing together, because they were clearly quarreling just now. How come they made up now? They can't guess Jiang Hai's thoughts. But whether it's Delina, Marian, Azalina, or Penelope, these people know when to say what. So they didn't say much, but followed Jiang Hai downstairs again, and went to the door. Qili's assistant has been waiting for a long time. She specially arranged 2 cars, one for Jiang Hai, Qili and herself, and the other for the 4 girls. Jiang Hai didn't say anything about this arrangement. He just stepped directly into the car. But when they were driving, the atmosphere in the car was obviously very awkward. Jiang Hai didn't have anything to say to Qili, and Qili didn't know what to say to Jiang Hai. The atmosphere in the car was awkward and strange. But fortunately, the restaurant wasn't far from the hotel. After about 10 minutes of driving they arrived. After getting out of the car, Jiang Hai looked at the restaurant in front of him, and couldn't help but secretly nod. He has to admit that Qili does have a way of doing business. Under the background of the current environment, the imperial court is very strict with public funds, and so on. This has almost cut off more than 70% of the customer flow. But Qili's high-end Western restaurant is not like other restaurants at this time. Instead, its business is very good. In the parking lot in front, there are all kinds of cars parked. Inside the restaurant, there is naturally a lot of people. If other restaurants see this, they will probably curse on the street. But the people who really know the business know that Qili's restaurant is popular for a reason. Raw materials. This was the biggest difference between Qili's restaurant and other restaurants. The top-grade ingredients in other restaurants were basically stir-fried. For example, some brands of white wine would be sold at a different price if they were sold outside. For example, lobsters, which are sold for dozens of yuan outside, are sold for hundreds of yuan here. Some people say that this is selling for money, but for most people who spend their own money, why should they charge more than 10 times, or even dozens of times more for their skills? They won't do this. So after the imperial court ordered a crackdown, these restaurants don't have a good life. But the steak in Qili's restaurant is the best steak. You can't buy it in other places no matter how much money you spend. The best beef in the world, at least in China, was the only one. Some people went to the United States and found that the price of the same beef was not much different. This made the original mentality of the people in China gradually calm down. This was the real thing. They, the rich people, also felt comfortable with spending money to eat. This was the biggest difference between Chili's restaurant and other restaurants. The meat is good. This is the hard truth. In fact, not only the rich people like to come here, but also some gold-collar and white-collar workers, who have some spare money, like to come here. Of course, they can't afford such expensive steaks, but some other food is also good for them. In addition, there are many people who come here to raise their status, or to show that they have better taste. Recently, they will also come here. Of course, they come here because there are spendthrifts paying for them. Some famous socialites will even be given a commission by Chile. This is all money. It is precisely because of these reasons that this restaurant is now full of people coming and going. And it is lively. Please, I have arranged a place. After seeing the slightly surprised look in Jiang Hai's eyes after getting out of the car, Chili's mouth curved into a rare smile. She raised her chin and showed the posture of a queen again. Then, she stretched out her hand and led Jiang Hai and the others into the restaurant. But just as they walked in, they happened to see a group of people going out. Most of these people were Huaxia people. Although the weather outside in June was already quite hot, these people were all wearing suits and ties. They were meticulously dressed from head to toe, so they didn't feel hot at all. Among them there are some foreigners. These people are obviously from the Arabian region, because the man in the lead is wearing a traditional Arabian white robe, talking and laughing with the people around him. When Jiang Hai and this person met, both of them were obviously stunned. Then, the Middle Eastern man stretched out his hand and walked over happily. As he walked, he said, "Hi Jiang Hai, my friend. I didn't expect to see you here." Seeing the Middle Eastern man coming over, Jiang Hai also walked over with a smile, and the two hugged. "I am from Huaxia. It is not strange to see me here, but I am still very curious to see you here, Defayman Weiha." Looking at the person in front of him, Jiang Hai also said with a smile, "Yes, the person in front of him is none other than the Middle Eastern tycoon, a member of the royal family of Dubai, Defayman Weiha Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum." Of course, Jiang Hai can't remember so many names, it's like a scam. "Just call me Defayman. I have nothing to do now, so I run around the world. Huaxia has a long history, so I am still very interested in this place." Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Defayman said with a smile. Jiang Hai couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. It is a benefit for Jiang Hai that he doesn't have to call him by his full name. Of course, if he kept writing his full name, it would be a piece of cake for him to write the story. Chapter 424. Hi Jiang. Are you here to eat beef too? This restaurant's beef is really good. Seeing Jiang Hai, Defayman was very enthusiastic. He directly pulled Jiang Hai to the entrance and talked to him. As for the Huaxia people beside him, other than smiling, they didn't do anything else. They didn't dare to do anything else. Defayman was not only a rich and powerful Middle Eastern tyrant, but also a member of the royal family of Dubai. He didn't come here only to represent himself, but also the country of Dubai. A few days ago, he had met the current emperor. These people accompanying him didn't dare to have any complaints. As for these people, when others saw them, they didn't dare to make a fuss. Of course the beef here is good. This is the beef produced in my manor. Hearing Defayman praising the beef here, Jiang Hai also felt honored. He smiled and said to Defayman, causing Defayman to be stunned for a moment, "Your beef." Looking at Jiang Hai, Defayman couldn't help but feel a little surprised. After he came here a few days ago, the first meal he ate was the state banquet that the emperor gave him after meeting the current emperor. But to be honest, the state banquet was very delicious to the people of Huaxia. However, to Defayman the taste was ordinary. Therefore, the next day after the state banquet, he asked the people accompanying him to help him look for delicious beef. Chili's restaurant came into their sights. After coming here and tasting it, they really felt that it was very delicious. Moreover, Defayman was used to being rich. Therefore, he came here every day to eat. Now that he heard that the beef was Jiang Hai's, he couldn't help but feel a little surprised. I raise cows. Didn't you know? Looking at his shocked expression, Jiang Hai couldn't help but smile and say, "Wow, I really didn't know. Can I go to your place to have a look when I have time?" Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Du Feimin said with a smile. And hearing his words, Jiang Hai naturally agreed. Looking at Jiang Hai, Du Feimin patted Jiang Hai's shoulder and said with a smile, "Next month or so, I should go to the US again. At that time, I will definitely visit your manor." Suddenly, he thought of something and asked Jiang Hai, "By the way, you will be staying here for a while, right?" "I should stay here for a while." After thinking for a while, if he didn't deal with those people, it would be difficult for him to leave. "That's it then. I'll be holding a cocktail party in 3 days. Remember to come." "All right, I won't disturb your meal any longer. I'll leave first." Glancing at the 6 girls behind Jiang Hai, Du Feimin purposely blinked his eyes. Then, he glanced at Jiang Hai with a gaze that all men would understand before leaving with a smile. Looking at his appearance, Jiang Hai couldn't help but shake his head helplessly. When did this guy become so dirty? However, Jiang Hai didn't have the leisure to care about him now. Although he was rich, he was also rich. What was the use of having so much money? If he had enough to spend, he wouldn't have enough. So after saying goodbye to Du Feimin, he walked into the restaurant. However, Jiang Hai didn't notice. While he was greeting Du Feimin, the person beside Du Feimin had been staring at him the whole time. Some people even began to search for something with their mobile phones. It was understandable. A person who was so close to Du Feimin couldn't be treated carelessly. After the two separated, a middle-aged man who had been accompanying Du Feimin made a gesture. Then, a young man quietly left the group and walked into the restaurant. However, at this time, Jiang Hai had already walked into the restaurant with Qili. Qili had already arranged everything here. As soon as they walked in, a waiter deliberately led them to a special room on the side. Although most of the restaurant had small partitions, there was also a private room. Inside the private room, there was a huge square table. In the middle of the table, there was a special place for the chef to cook. Here, the main dish was Western food, steak, and teppanyaki. You can choose Western food or teppanyaki. After all, both of these dishes were quite good. After Jiang Hai and the others sat down, a middle-aged man who looked to be in his 40s walked into the middle of the table and began to prepare the dishes. "This is Master Zhang Diqing, the best Western food chef and teppanyaki chef in China. I specially hired him from Japan." Seeing Jiang Hai's slightly curious gaze, Qili said with a smile. The man also nodded gently to Jiang Hai. Without saying much, he began to cook. Although the portion was for 7 people, the chef's cooking was really good. He was very fast. Soon, the beef and seafood prepared by Qili were divided into 7 portions. After cooking, they were placed on their respective plates. To be honest, this was the first time that Jiang Hai ate his own beef on teppanyaki. So he was a little curious. Jiang Hai didn't need to do anything, because there was a prepared black pepper sauce on it. He put a piece of beef into his mouth. The moment his teeth touched the beef, the juicy taste of Jiang Hai's beef, coupled with the fresh taste of the grass, the taste of the beef, and the abundance of spiritual energy, instantly filled Jiang Hai's mouth. "It's worthy of being my beef." Narrowing his eyes, he quickly chewed this piece of beef into pieces and threw it into his stomach. Jiang Hai couldn't help but let out a long sigh of satisfaction. He suddenly realized that he was really wasteful in the past. Although he knew that Jiang Hai's beef was so good, he really didn't expect it to be so good. In the past, Jiang Hai's beef could be rated 90 points by himself. He was very afraid that he would be too proud, so he deducted it. Now he realized that beef could be rated 100 points, but the beef he made could only be rated 70 points. As for the beef made by a professional chef, it could be rated 120 points. This was the difference. It seems that after going back, I have to consider hiring a professional chef. Narrowing his eyes, Jiang Hai whispered in a low voice. "I know. Teacher Xanthi's father is a professional French chef. You can ask him to cook." Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Marian immediately raised her hand and looked at Jiang Hai seriously. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai touched his chin. If it was really possible for him to get together with Cindy Clive, asking his father-in-law to come over and cook. It didn't seem too good. Because Jiang Hai didn't seem to be a good man. Seeing his father-in-law in the villa all day long, Jiang Hai would also feel uncomfortable. In this world, not only the relationship between mother-in-law and daughter-in-law was not good, but the relationship between son-in-law and father-in-law was also not good. Cough, if you feel good, I can help you keep an eye out. However, the person who was more nervous was not Jiang Hai, but Qi Li. No joke, she also knew who Sh20 Clive was. Although the two had not met, they both knew each other's existence. Why didn't Qi Li show too much hostility to Ai Xiaoxi and Feng Yunxian, but only gently beat them? This was because she knew that it was impossible for these two women to climb up the ranks and become official servants. To put it bluntly, these two women were concubines in ancient times. Perhaps they couldn't even be considered concubines. They were just maidservants in the same room. Such women were destined to be unable to compete with her for the position of wife. But Sh20 Clive was different. If Jiang Hai really had something to do with her, then maybe he wouldn't have anything to do with it. Well, it tastes good. Can you tell me about the Yin family? At this time, Jiang Hai obviously did not want to say too much in this regard. After all, he was not very close to Sh20 Clive recently, and he also felt a little guilty. So after hesitating for a moment, Jiang Hai asked Qi Li the most important thing this time, which was also the purpose of their visit. An family is an old family in the imperial capital. The current head of the family is An Desun, the father of An Zhangwu and An Zhangyong. According to legend, his great-grandfather was an officer in the Beiyang army. After the surrender of Japan, he was one of the first people to enter the imperial capital. After Taizu established the country, he led his troops to surrender, then withdrew from the army, and took root in the imperial capital. Looking at Jiang Hai, Qi Li quickly said. Qi Li's hatred for the Yin family was not a joke, so she was very clear about the Yin family's situation. Although the Yin family once had the merit of supporting the emperor, there were many people who had the merit of supporting the emperor. At the time, their ancestor was the most powerful, but he was only a colonel and did not have any real power. In the generation of An Zhangwu's grandfather, they could not live anymore, so they entered the business circle. Therefore, the Yin family was considered to be one of the weaker clans of the previous dynasty. They did not have many members, and there were not many people who were involved in politics. Furthermore, none of them had ever entered the army. When there was no connection between interests, human feelings would gradually fade. Not long after, the Yin family gradually became a business family. Otherwise, the Yin family, who was born and raised in the capital, would not have to spend so much effort to deal with the Qi family, who was an outsider. Not to mention the large families in the country, even some second-rate families in the capital could easily deal with the Qi family. However, because they were born and raised in the capital, even if the Qi family had a great advantage, it would not be easy to deal with the Yin family. If Jiang Hai really did what he did in the United States, and asked Azalina to deal with the Yin family as soon as he came, not to mention whether it could be done, it was estimated that the people who had a grudge against the Yin family, such as Jiang Hai and the Qi family, would be directly monitored. It would be fine if they were killed, but if they were left alive, it would be fine. Huaxia people were particularly united sometimes, especially when others stepped into their small circle. It was hard to say whether Jiang Hai's actions would arouse the thoughts of these people in the capital. At that time, whether they could leave or not would be another matter. After listening to Qi Li's words, the originally delicious beef suddenly became a little worse. Chapter 425. What do you mean? Do you think I'm a mute? Putting down the chopsticks in his hand, the beef that is the most delicious for others is indeed delicious in Jiang Hai's mouth. But Jiang Hai doesn't lack these, so he usually eats freely. It doesn't matter if he eats less, but if he holds this anger in his heart and doesn't let it out, it will kill him. Of course not, we can't suffer in silence. But when she heard Jiang Hai's words, Qi Li spoke first. She now knows that Jiang Hai still doesn't fully trust her. If she stands in the wrong position, Jiang Hai will really leave. Although she is thinking for Jiang Hai, it seems that she has to consider Jiang Hai's inner thoughts. Then what do you think we should do? Looking at Qi Li in front of him, Jiang Hai said with a serious face. Seeing this, Qi Li waved to Master Zhang who was cooking. Master Zhang nodded politely and left first. At this time, although Jiang Hai doesn't fully trust all the people in this room, at least Qi Li does. At least if we want to do it, we have to plan how to kill him in one blow, how to deal with the next thing, who to find to do it. These are all things we need to consider. Looking at Jiang Hai, Qi Li said with a serious face. Leave this to me. I came here with the boss to do this job. Hearing Qi Li's words, Azalina slowly picked up a piece of beef in front of her, stuffed it into her mouth, and then said to Qi Li with a smile. You. Looking at Azalina, Qi Li couldn't help but be stunned for a moment. Originally, she thought that Azalina was Jiang Hai's new lover, or like Penelope, a lawyer's assistant or something like that. But she didn't expect that she would actually say that she wanted to solve it. Let me introduce you. Azalina Vicabrio, former KGB agent, now my bodyguard. Looking at Qi Li's surprised look, Jiang Hai's heart calmed down a little. He picked up a piece of beef and ate it while talking. Excuse me. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Qi Li couldn't help but hesitate. But she didn't expect Jiang Hai to have such an expert around him. It seems that Jiang Hai didn't come here casually. He came here prepared. Originally, she thought that Jiang Hai was so angry that he lost his head and directly came to fight within Zhangwu. It seems that he unknowingly received a very good team. The beauty in front of him turned out to be an agent that he only saw in the movies? So amazing. Since we have people, then we also need to prepare. Goodbye. We need to know the time and place of the attack. If possible, we need to uproot the family once and for all. If only 1 or 2 people are caught, the rest will be on guard. Then it will be difficult to deal with them. Looking at Azalina in front of her, Qi Li said slowly. Up to you. Hearing Qi Li's words, Jiang Hai shrugged his shoulders. Originally, according to what he said, they should directly break into their house and then exterminate their family. But just like what Qi Li said, they should have done it right. This is not the United States. Here, as a rich man, he has no privileges. The domestic and foreign situations are completely different. In foreign countries, it is the world of the gold standard. Money is everything, especially in Europe and the United States. If you have money, it means that the local government has to rely on you to live. If you have money, it means that the local police are your personal bodyguards. If you have money, it means that you have everything. But in China, no matter how rich a person is, he is actually just a pig raised by the court. They can kill you whenever they want. Lawyers' laws, they have to serve the court, but abroad they serve the rich. Of course, whether it is at home or abroad, ordinary people have the least human rights. This is very clear. Since there is no way to directly kill the family, and directly kill the family, then let Qi Li think of a way. Bang bang bang. Just as Qi Li was thinking of a way, the door of their private room suddenly rang. This made Qi Li frown involuntarily. After all, she had ordered not to disturb them unless there is a big matter. Is the restaurant manager tired of his job? How dare he ignore my words? Seeing Qi Li's dissatisfaction, the assistant immediately received the signal and walked to the door leisurely. After opening the door, he looked at the person outside the door unhappily and said coldly, "What's the matter?" Seeing the assistant open the door, the restaurant manager could not help but say a little awkwardly, "Sir, you must see Chairman Qi." Oui. Seeing the assistant open the door, the restaurant manager could not help but say a little awkwardly. He naturally knew of Qi Li's orders, but he could not afford to offend the person beside him. "Okay, you don't have to say any more. Sorry, this is a private party, so it is not convenient for us to entertain you. Please feel free to do as you wish." Looking at the tall and thin young man standing beside the manager, the assistant here did not have a good expression. However, the young man ignored the assistant and said directly, "Sorry, your level is not high enough." However, the young man ignored the assistant and said directly. Then, he jumped over the manager and directly pushed the door open. The assistant behind the door was almost pushed to the ground by him. Seeing that this person actually dared to make a move, the manager had already signaled to the security guards in the distance. If this guy dared to make a move, even if he was from the imperial court, they would dare to take him down first. After all, this country still had to maintain harmony on the surface. Mr. Jiang Hai, hello, my name is Zhu Wen. I am from the National Security Council. I feel that we can talk. However, after this person entered the room, he did not take the next step. Instead, he stood in front of Jiang Hai and said with a serious face, National Security Council? National Security Agency? Listening to this person's words, Jiang Hai was stunned for a moment, then said with a smile, since the National Security Agency is here, will there be some Dragon Group, Phoenix Group, and so on in a while? If these things really existed, Jiang Hai would have poisoned himself to death. How could he be so shameless? After all, this was a farming novel. Our country does not have a national security agency, only a Ministry of National Security. Our National Security Council is subordinate to the Ministry of National Security. I came to contact you this time to discuss with you about Mr. Du Fayman Wayhamhamad bin Radi Al Maktoum. However, looking at Jiang Hai, the young man did not act too arrogantly and continued to speak. Sit. Originally, when he came in, Jiang Hai had already wanted to drive him away, but when he heard that he came to talk to him about Du Fayman, Jiang Hai couldn't help but feel a little puzzled, because he was really curious. What does Du Fayman have to do with him? Pointing to a position in the distance, Jiang Hai said to him. The man did not hesitate, and walked in directly and sat in that position. As for Qili, she winked at the assistant who almost fell down. Although the assistant was very reluctant, she still stood up and closed the door. I came to Mr. Jiang this time mainly because I was assigned by my superiors to ask Mr. Jiang to do us a favor. After sitting down, the man did not say much and directly said to Jiang Hai, What do you mean? After eating another piece of beef, Jiang Hai said slowly. He was not in the mood to talk nonsense with him. At your level, I don't think I need to talk too much nonsense. Our country is short of oil, very short of oil, and the Middle East is an oil-producing area. But in recent years, the power of the United States and European countries in the Middle East has increased instead of decreased, which has made us very unlucky. So this time, Prince Du Fayman came here, because the higher-ups want to get the oil supply from the Middle East through him. Seeing that Jiang Hai was not very patient to listen to him, the man quickly said. He now knew the situation in the country, not to mention that Jiang Hai's foundation was not in the country. Even if it was in the country, young people nowadays would rarely pay attention to the imperial court if it was not for their own interests. You can say that these people are free or rebellious, but this is the reality now. The education of patriotism made the young people hate the Japanese, hate the Americans, hate the Koreans, hate the Indians, hate the Indonesian monkeys. But when they were really asked to contribute their property to the country, 99 out of 100 people would disagree. This was the selfishness of human beings. After all, it was not a few decades ago, where everything could be sacrificed for a single sentence. So at this time, talking about the country or ethnic group to others was nonsense. Interests were the most important. Oil. Isn't there no oil in Dubai? When he heard the word oil, Jiang Hai's heart skipped a beat. Did the imperial court also know about his 400 million oil futures? But fortunately, after listening to the conversation, he found out that it was not about his oil, but that the imperial court was eyeing the oil in the Middle East. That did make sense. His oil futures were worth $400 million, and the state wouldn't be able to buy them. Even if he sold them for $6 each, $400 million would only be $2 billion. Including the added value, it would only be slightly more than $30 billion. The country spent trillions of dollars every year. 30 billion was just a drop in the ocean. Of course, he would not brag about it. The Middle East had always been the backyard of the United States and European countries. How could they let Huaxia get involved? Dubai doesn't have any oil, but the Arab countries are one. Apart from the other countries, the oil in the other countries will also be held by the royalty of the other countries. This time, Mr. Du Fayman is here to check on our country's high-speed rail construction. He's very likely to introduce a high-speed rail project to Dubai. However, this project is also our strong suit, so we're very confident about it. But regarding the oil issue, we need a guide to help us. At this point, it was obvious that the country was interested in his personal relationship with Du Feynman and wanted him to be the lobbyist. Looking at the person in front of him, Jiang Hai smiled. It did not matter if he was the lobbyist. After all, he was just mentioning it. He did not represent the country. But then again, like what he said just now, he could be the lobbyist, but what about the benefits? Chapter 426. Tell me what you want. Looking at Jiang Hai's playful eyes, the young man couldn't help but frown. Sure enough, this guy wasn't easy to get along with. Looking at Jiang Hai's appearance, the young man knew that the imperial court would have to pay a price. However, the imperial court is not his. He just came here to ask Jiang Hai for help. As long as Jiang Hai is willing to help, the imperial court will pay some price. Looking at Jiang Hai in front of him, the young man said calmly, "It seems that the imperial court is not sincere. If I don't know anything, why would I send someone here? Let's talk about it when you think about what you can give me." Jiang Hai really doesn't know how to negotiate, but he is not stupid. It is not good for him to reveal his trump card too early, so he just smiled, then picked up the teacup in front of him. Since ancient times, Huaxia has a saying that the guest should be served with dishes and sent off. The only person here who can be regarded as a guest is this young man. This young man has naturally received professional training, so he naturally knows the reason why Jiang Hai did this. So he didn't say much. He stood up directly, nodded to Jiang Hai, and left the room. He just came here to convey the message of the higher-ups. The specific negotiation depends on Jiang Hai and their higher-ups. Jiang Hai, do you really want to agree with them? Seeing this person leave, Qi Li, who was sitting next to Jiang Hai, couldn't help but ask hesitantly. Based on her understanding of the imperial court, it was true that privately cooperating with the imperial court would earn some reputation. But other than reputation, there was nothing else. It was inevitable that they would lose money. In the eyes of these merchants, money was much more useful than reputation. There is no such thing as agreeing or not. Let's see their sincerity. Anyway, my business is not in the country. We will talk about it when the time comes. This person is just a small fry. If I release my goodwill, there will probably be a big shot coming to talk to me tomorrow. This is also one of the opportunities to kill the Yin family. Looking at Qi Li in front of him, Jiang Hai narrowed his eyes and said with a smile, "The main purpose of Jiang Hai's coming here is to kill the Yin family. If he makes it clear, the imperial court will naturally help him." Okay. Looking at Jiang Hai's appearance, Qi Li hesitated for a moment, nodded, and then changed the topic. For her, there is nothing that makes her happier than making money through the restaurant. Of course, if Jiang Hai can understand her intentions, it is indeed something that makes her happier than making money through the restaurant. After the meal, Jiang Hai and the others returned to the hotel. As for Qi Li, she went home. Lying on the big bed in the hotel, Jiang Hai scrolled through the two numbers on his phone, AI Xiaoxi and Feng Yinshen. To be honest, although they hadn't been gone for long, and they kept in touch with each other on the phone and the internet, Jiang Hai missed them a little. After all, they were the only two women in the world who had confirmed their relationship with him. What? Aphrodite? Jiang Hai can only say that Aphrodite was an accident. He really didn't want to touch the girls around him. Now that they are in the capital, to be honest, Jiang Hai misses them even more. But after looking at it for a while, Jiang Hai put down the phone. If it was before he knew about the Yin family's power, Jiang Hai would call them, but now Jiang Hai has to consider more. For example, if they fail, how can they escape? Jiang Hai already regretted bringing Delina, Marian, and Penelope daily, not to mention adding more people. After hesitating for a moment, Jiang Hai patted his head and threw the phone aside. Let's talk about it after the matter here is over. After all, he flew for more than 10 hours and had to adjust to the jet lag. Jiang Hai was also a little tired. The next morning, he didn't get up. Instead, he slept until 10 o'clock before he was awakened by a knock on the door. Wearing pajamas, he walked to the door in a daze. After opening the door, he found that the person who knocked on the door was none other than the staff of the Ministry of State Security, who came to see him last night. Behind him, there was a middle-aged man in his 40s who looked very energetic. This middle-aged man was about 1.75 meters tall and looked very decent. He wore a pair of black-rimmed glasses and looked more like a scholar than a lackey of the imperial court. A government official. The first impression he gave was not bad. "Hello, Mr. Jiang, we meet again. This is my superior, Mr. Chao Weiqing. He has full authority to talk to you about the topic that we didn't finish last night." Looking at Jiang Hai, who opened the door, the young man here said with a serious face, "Yes, please come in." Looking at the two people in front of him, Jiang Hai was stunned for a moment. Then, he smiled and waved his hand, indicating that they could come in. The two people didn't say much and went straight in. They looked around the suite. Although they belong to the court, they usually don't have many opportunities to live in suites of this level. Especially the young man, after walking in, his eyes were still shining. He really didn't know how this Jiang Hai, who is about the same age as him, can live in such a good suite. Why is he still a small staff? But he can already live in such a good suite and become friends with a member of the Dubai royal family. Most importantly, he has such a beautiful wife, Qi Li. Yes, one night is enough for these people to investigate Jiang Hai's background. They all know that Jiang Hai is the supplier of beef to Qi Li's restaurant. At the same time, they also know that Jiang Hai is Qi Li's husband. Take a seat first. There is something to drink in the fridge. I just got up and need to wash up. Jiang Hai looked at the two people in front of him and said casually. Then he walked into the bathroom in his room and started to wash up. This is the bad habit that Jiang Hai has developed after staying in the United States for a while. He doesn't treat his officials as leaders. After all, in the United States, a rich person like him is in the privileged class. Officials are nothing in front of him. For someone like him, he basically ignores the town mayor and the mayor. Of course, he is still very humble when it comes to the governor and the president. However, when his wealth accumulates to a certain extent, even the governor and the president need to see him to ask for political funds. Then, he can really do whatever he wants in the United States. As long as he doesn't do anything outrageous, no one will find trouble with him. Of course, this is all nonsense now. At present, he is only the richest man in Winthrop. However, this habit has already allowed him to ignore many officials in the country. This is completely different from last year at this time. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the two people on the other side were stunned. Then, the young man's face showed a trace of displeasure. However, the middle-aged man didn't care. He still had a smile on his face as he looked at Jiang Hai's room. After about 10 minutes, Jiang Hai finished washing his face, brushing his teeth, and washing his hair. He walked out of the room again. He casually sat in front of the two people and nodded at them. Seeing Jiang Hai sit down, the middle-aged man opposite him said with a smile, "Mr. Jiang, you are really young." Looking at the information, Mr. Jiang should be less than 30 years old. You are not even 30 years old, yet you have such a large family fortune. You are really a hero from a young age. He said this for a reason. Firstly, he wanted to flatter Jiang Hai. Secondly, he wanted to tell Jiang Hai that they have already investigated his situation. If Jiang Hai still wants to play some tricks, then there is no need to. I like to do things directly. I don't like our country's tradition of beating around the bush. I know that you represent the imperial court, so you must have already investigated my situation. I can also help the imperial court talk to Du Feimin about the oil and high-speed rail. However, I still want to ask the same question. What can the imperial court give me? Looking at Du Feimin in front of him, Jiang Hai smiled and said faintly. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the middle-aged man also looked at him seriously. Isn't serving the country a virtue that a Huaxia person should have? Why do you say that? After looking at him for about 10 seconds, the middle-aged man said slowly. It was obvious that he was ready to flatter Jiang Hai. Upon hearing his words, Jiang Hai immediately waved his hand and said hurriedly, "Stop. If the imperial court is not sincere, then forget it. He wouldn't throw away the benefits that he got just because some people said a few words. Although he needed these people to do him a small favor and gather the family's people, he wouldn't give up the benefits that he deserved. Most importantly, he wanted to distance himself from the family's matter. That was the most important thing. Seeing that Jiang Hai was about to leave, the middle-aged man stretched out his hand to stop him and said slowly, "Brother Jiang, don't be too anxious. The imperial court represents a country. They definitely won't bow to anyone. Therefore, there are no conditions or sincerity. However, the imperial court can give you some help and compensation." Seeing that Jiang Hai was about to leave, the middle-aged man didn't know whether it was true or not. In fact, to put it bluntly, this was the art of Huaxia language. The imperial court wouldn't bow to anyone, any force, or any country. However, if you worked for the imperial court would definitely help you. It was just like being a civil servant, and the imperial court would pay you a salary. The imperial court would always be high and mighty. Therefore, in other words, it depended on whether Jiang Hai wanted face or benefits. For Jiang Hai, face was more important than the sky. Therefore, he chose benefits. Oh, then what is the imperial court's compensation and help? I'm curious. After sitting down again, Jiang Hai said calmly, "The imperial court won't be of much help to you in the United States. I don't think you want the imperial court's shadow in your manner. This won't be good for you in the United States. If you are targeted by the United States government, then it will be troublesome. Therefore, the imperial court will mainly help you in China. I know you are selling things to China. The imperial court will give you the first advantage. That is, if you sell your things into China, you won't have to pay customs taxes." Looking at Jiang Hai, the middle-aged man said the first condition. However, Jiang Hai curled his lips when he heard this. What could he sell? How much customs tax could he get from selling beef? He was going for the high-end sales, not the volume. Chapter 427. Seeing Jiang Hai curl his lips slightly, the middle-aged man sighed in his heart. In fact, when he heard this condition, he couldn't help but be stunned. This was because he also knew that Jiang Hai was taking the quality route. His beef was mainly sold on the high-end route, not the quantity. 1,000 cows, even 10,000 cows. A cow can be slaughtered for a few hundred pounds of meat. 10,000 cows can be slaughtered for a few million pounds of meat. It was not a small amount, enough for a person to eat for a lifetime. But the problem was that there were 1.3 billion people in Huaxia. Millions of kilograms of beef was nothing in the market. Of course, it was very expensive as a whole. 1 kilogram was sold for 2,400 yuan. So millions of kilograms were worth 12 billion yuan in total. But according to the customs tax, the beef only had to pay more than 10 million yuan in customs tax. It was not easy to ask Jiang Hai to help with a customs tax of more than 10 million yuan. Don't worry, there is a second condition. We can exempt the cheese restaurant from business tax, urban construction tax, and individual income tax. Seeing that Jiang Hai was a little impatient, the middle-aged man immediately said the second condition. Hearing this, Jiang Hai frowned more deeply. Because the Western restaurant of the cheese restaurant was built by Qi Li, and all the money it earned belonged to her. But it had nothing to do with Jiang Hai. He and Qi Li were not really a couple, so it had nothing to do with him. Seeing Jiang Hai frowning more deeply, the middle-aged man panicked. Indeed, Jiang Hai did not lack money for the first benefit. But for the second benefit, Jiang Hai should be very tempted. According to the current business situation of the cheese restaurant, the net profit every day was more than 2 million yuan. This year's turnover was 730 million yuan. According to the tax, the business tax was 5%, the urban construction tax was 7%, which was 12%, plus the tax of 20%. Although there was a reduction, 30% of the total would be tax. 730 million yuan meant 219 million yuan. This would save him a lot of money. Why did Jiang Hai still look reluctant? It was more than 30 million yuan in US dollars. In fact, he didn't know whether the money could be saved or not. Jiang Hai didn't intend to ask for it. It had nothing to do with him. Third, if the cheese restaurant and you have any projects in China in the future, we will give you the green light. Seeing that Jiang Hai was not tempted by the first two conditions, he said the third one. But the third condition made Jiang Hai speechless. His focus was mainly in Boston. What did the projects in China have to do with him? He didn't intend to invest his funds in China. After all, he had seen too many cases where money was wasted. If he put his money in the bank, he could live on the interest. If he put his money in China, what if he was targeted by the second generation? Who would he turn to for help? To be honest, I'm not interested in what you said. Looking at the middle-aged man in front of him, Jiang Hai waved his hand, indicating that he should stop talking for the time being. To put it bluntly, these three conditions had nothing to do with Jiang Hai. Then what does Brother Jiang mean? If there's anything you want, I'll pass it on to my boss. Hearing that Jiang Hai was not satisfied with these things, the middle-aged man in front of him couldn't help but be a little surprised. Was Jiang Hai going to ask for an exorbitant price? He had already said just now that this was the help and compensation from the imperial court. If Jiang Hai dares to ask for an exorbitant price, wouldn't he be afraid of losing his life to spend it? But now, no matter what, Jiang Hai had the initiative, so he also wanted to hear what Jiang Hai wanted. What I want is quite simple. First, I want our country's tour group to open an extra route to our town. Looking at the middle-aged man in front of him, Jiang Hai made his first request. But when he heard Jiang Hai's words, the middle-aged man was stunned. What's the situation? Open a tour route? What kind of condition is this? Not to mention people at his level, even some cadres at the prefecture-level city level. As long as they are in charge of tourism, report to the higher-ups and ask for an extra tour route, and the higher-ups will approve it. Is there a need to trouble himself with this matter? It's like a person inviting another person to a meal. After arriving at a 5-star hotel, the other person said that a steamed bun and a glass of water would be enough. This made the person who invited the other person a little overwhelmed. Can't I? Seeing his appearance, Jiang Hai hesitated and asked. Logically speaking, he also knew that this matter shouldn't be difficult, but he must ask these people for help anyway, because he wants to mess with the Yin family. But if he can solve the problem of Winthrop's tour route, it will be a good thing for Jiang Hai. Of course, there's no problem. What other requirements do you have? Just say it. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the man immediately nodded and said, logically speaking, in a negotiation, even if it's easy to do, he will hesitate. Obviously, it's not so easy to do. However, the middle-aged man didn't play any tricks on this matter. Although Jiang Hai didn't understand it now, it didn't mean that he wouldn't understand it in the future. If Jiang Hai knew that this matter wasn't so difficult to deal with after he left, it would be troublesome. The second thing is that I want to introduce some domestic animals. Seeing the middle-aged man agree to his first condition so readily, Jiang Hai was a little confused. Although he knows that this matter is not difficult, it's not too simple, right? When he was in Winthrop, Mayor Wallace almost went crazy because of the problem of tourists. Now he is still asking the Massachusetts government to increase the tour route. How can this matter be solved so easily when he is back in China? No problem, except for pandas, golden monkeys and other species unique to our country. Everything else is fine, even Siberian tigers and so on. As for plants, except for the mother plant of Dahongpo, everything else is fine. But the premise is that the United States has to accept it. Seeing Jiang Hai put forward the second condition, the man agreed without hesitation. This is also a very simple request. Even some of the forestry department directors of prefecture-level cities can make this decision, let alone people at their level. Listening to the other party agree to 2 consecutive requests, Jiang Hai was also a little confused. It seems that he thought too much at the beginning. Indeed, the country does not allow some locally preserved species to be brought out. But that is just a general request. If they really want to bring them out, it is not impossible. After all, some of the domestic plant and animal species have no advantage compared to foreign species. For example, the Ujimikan sheep that Jiang Hai had once eaten, which he had wholeheartedly wanted to bring abroad, was compared to the boar goat. Although its meat is more compact and delicious, the amount of meat produced is far less, and the scale can't be expanded because it is more aggressive. Coupled with the geographical conditions of breeding, it is destined that it is impossible to breed them on a large scale abroad. The reason why it is not allowed is to maintain the local livestock industry and maintain stability. If Jiang Hai wants to bring some out to raise, it doesn't matter, let alone people at their level. Except for national treasures that are not allowed, they think that everything else is fine. Using some animals in exchange for Jiang Hai's friendship is too worth it. Hearing the middle-aged man agree to his second condition so readily, Jiang Hai can't help but be a little speechless. In fact, before he mentioned it, he only had these two conditions. The first condition is to let him have a lot of money, and the second condition is to let him fill his stomach, especially after Xiaoyu moved into his manor recently. His love for food is getting stronger and stronger, but if he always eats Western food, there will be a time when he is tired of it. Chinese food is better. However, the seasoning for Chinese food is not ordinary. Now that he has the green light, he can make whatever he wants. Third, if something happens to me in the country, the imperial court has to come forward to help me settle it. However, Jiang Hai thought about it. Since the first two conditions are so easy, plus the in families matter, Jiang Hai decided to add a protective talisman for himself. No problem. Hearing Jiang Hai's third condition, although he didn't know why Jiang Hai added this third condition, the other party still nodded. As long as Jiang Hai doesn't seek death, then they can protect Jiang Hai. It doesn't matter. These three conditions, in addition to the three conditions from the beginning, are all of my conditions. Looking at the middle-aged man in front of him, Jiang Hai always felt that as long as he has these three conditions, it would be a bit of a loss, so he still said to him, "Okay." In fact, in this middle-aged man's view, among the three conditions of Jiang Hai, the first and second are nonsense. There is no need for him. The young man beside him can say anything. The only condition added is Jiang Hai's third condition. He doesn't even need to ask for permission from his superior. He can make the decision on the spot. In his view, Jiang Hai is still very patriotic. Originally, he thought that Jiang Hai would ask for a lot, but he didn't expect Jiang Hai to give such three conditions. This made him feel a little emotional. It seems that the imperial court's patriotism education is still very good. Of course, Jiang Hai didn't know what he was thinking. In Jiang Hai's view, he got what he wanted. Winthrop opened a tourism route, so he has more money to earn. One must know that the villa area, shooting range and commercial street are all his territory. Introducing domestic animals and plants makes him even more happy. In the future, if he wants to drink good tea and eat good food, he doesn't need to look at old Master Zhang's face, because he can also do it. The third condition is to protect himself under the condition that he doesn't betray the imperial court. This is very important. After the 6 conditions were finished, the two also signed a simple written contract. Of course, it can't be seen in public. If either party exposed this agreement, the agreement will be void, but it is useful to find it in private. Chapter 428. The plan can start. Looking at Qi Li in front of him, Jiang Hai said faintly, "After contacting the imperial court people, the imperial court people left first, but before leaving, he gave Jiang Hai his business card. With this, it meant that if Jiang Hai had anything, he could look for him at any time. As for the agreement, the two of them left with 1 copy each. Shortly after the middle-aged man left, Qi Li and her assistant came over. Everyone had lunch together in the hotel's restaurant, and Jiang Hai said faintly to Qi Li at the dinner table, "Have you finished negotiating?" Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Qi Li couldn't help but raise her head and look at him with surprise. "Yes, it's been negotiated. The day after tomorrow is the day of Du Feimin's banquet. Big and small people in the capital will definitely go, but the possibility of you being invited is not very high. If the family is invited, then you don't have to care about them. If they are not invited, you can go and leak some information to them." Hearing Qi Li's words, Jiang Hai nodded. "This time we must deal with them." Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Qi Li's eyes were also shining. Indeed, when Du Feimin held a banquet, it was inevitable that the influential people in the capital would go. After all, This was the royal family of the Middle East, the local tycoons of the Middle East. If they could make friends with such people, it would definitely be beneficial for them. Even if they couldn't make much money from them, they could also use the name of the local tycoons of the Middle East to do well in the country. However, these influential people naturally referred to the government, the imperial court, and some super-rich people. For Qi Li and the others, third-rate businessmen with family assets of less than 18 billion yuan, it was not so easy to get into this circle. For businessmen, what was the most important thing? Money. Well, yes, money was the most important thing. In addition to money, the most important thing was connections. If the An family got wind of such an opportunity, it was impossible for them not to come. This was also Jiang Hai's bait to catch them, and it was a bait that they had no choice but to bite. Then I'll go and arrange it. What are you going to do in the afternoon? Do you need me to leave her behind to be your guide? Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Qi Li nodded to show that she understood. At the same time, she turned on her phone and prepared to fish. But halfway through, she suddenly remembered that Jiang Hai didn't have anything to do. If Delina and the others came to play, Jiang Hai would definitely take them out to play. However, Jiang Hai wasn't very familiar with the imperial capital. Should she arrange a tour guide for him? No need. Shaking his head, Jiang Hai directly rejected Qi Li's kindness. He didn't like this assistant. Oh! Hearing Jiang Hai's rejection, Qi Li was stunned for a moment, then responded softly. It seems that her relationship with Jiang Hai is still very stiff. After that she didn't speak, lowered her head, and played with her phone. By the way, your restaurants don't have to pay taxes in the future. You don't have to pay customs taxes anymore. This is also one of the deals I made with them. Just when the atmosphere in the private room was a little cold, Jiang Hai said indifferently. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Qi Li raised her head in surprise and looked at Jiang Hai. She really didn't expect that Jiang Hai would help her save hundreds of millions in taxes so easily. No, it was more than hundreds of millions. Jiang Hai didn't mention the number of years. Doesn't that mean that as long as my restaurants are open, I don't have to pay taxes? That's not just hundreds of millions, it might be billions or even tens of billions. Thinking of this, Qi Li's eyes began to shine. She really didn't think that Jiang Hai would give her such a big gift. Of course, she also knew that she wouldn't take all this money for herself. She would definitely take out Jiang Hai's share. Okay, we're done eating. You can go do your work. I want to go out and play. Looking at Qi Li's shining eyes in front of him, Jiang Hai couldn't help but feel a headache. This money grubber is really too much. I hope she doesn't misunderstand anything. Jiang Hai originally agreed based on the principle of not taking advantage of a bastard. Now it seems that Qi Li is thinking too much. Okay, I understand. I'll call Feng Yunshan, an AI Xiaoxi, to come and accompany you. After all, you're not very familiar with the capital. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Qi Li also stood up and wanted to walk out with a smile on her face. But before she walked out, she stopped and looked at Jiang Hai with a serious face and asked. Hearing her words, not only Jiang Hai, but also Daliana, Marian and Lily were stunned. Azalina and Penelope were not familiar with Feng Yunshan and AI Xiaoxi. Penelope had never seen them before. Although Azalina had seen them before, she only glanced at them in a hurry. After all, she was a prisoner at that time. She only knew that there were two Huaxiao women around Jiang Hai, but other people knew what these two women were up to. Especially Qi Li's assistant. When did her master become so easy to talk to? She even took the initiative to send them to Jiang Hai's side? Forget about them. Before the matter is completed, it's better not to tell them about my news. Otherwise, if something happens, it will be difficult for them. But when he heard Qi Li's words, Jiang Hai shook his head. If he waited until the An family was solved, Jiang Hai estimated that there was a 90% chance that he would look for them. After all, they are his first and second women, who have confirmed their relationship. They are much more important than Qi Li. Oh, then I understand. Hearing that Jiang Hai didn't intend to look for Feng Yunshan and AI Xiaoxi, although his original intention was to protect them, as long as Jiang Hai didn't look for them, Qi Li's heart was very happy. After everything was arranged, Qi Li left first. She was going to prepare for fishing. As for Jiang Hai, he took Delina, Marian, Azalina and Penelope together. They sat in the car arranged by the hotel and began to play in the imperial capital. The imperial capital, one of the 4 ancient capitals of Huaxia, has the most world cultural heritage in the world. The history of the city's founding in 3060 gave birth to a large number of scenic spots and historical sites. But speaking of the official history of the imperial capital, it was mainly the Ming and Qing dynasties. Before that, Liao, Jin, and Yuan were all hostile countries of the Song dynasty in the history of Huaxia. They were not recorded in the history books and were not familiar to everyone. The people who were really familiar with the imperial capital were the Ming and Qing dynasties. However, even in the Ming dynasty, the place where the capital was set at the beginning was not the imperial capital, but the southern capital. Later, the king of Yan Zhu rebelled. He was afraid that he could not control the local people, so he moved the capital back to the imperial capital. Later, the Manchurian Qing entered the pass and established the Qing dynasty. This was another story. After the overthrow of the Qing dynasty, the place where the previous dynasty was located was actually the southern capital, not the imperial capital. The reason why the imperial capital where the current imperial court was located was mainly because when Emperor Taizu first established the country, he did not have any big cities in his hands. Before the establishment of the country, the original city that was set as the capital was Bingcheng. However, because Bingcheng was too cold and too close to the border, there was no strategic buffer zone. Moreover, before the establishment of the country, they had conquered the imperial capital, so they decided to set the imperial capital in the imperial capital. However, these had nothing to do with Jiang Hai. He just came here to play. He had to admit that there were still many places to play in the imperial capital, such as the Forbidden City, the Great Wall, and the Summer Palace. In Jiang Hai's view, other than these 3 places, there were no other places to play. Tianan, Imperial Ancestral Temple, these places were connected to the Forbidden City. Tianan was the entrance of the Forbidden City, so they would visit it together. The Great Wall was outside the imperial capital, and the Summer Palace and the Old Summer Palace were together. So, the main places to play in the imperial capital were these 3 places. Of course, if they wanted to, they could visit the Bird's Nest. After all, that was the place where the Olympic Games were held. The Bird's Nest, the Water Cube, and the National Stadium were together. However, they needed tickets to enter. Jiang Hai did not like it very much. This afternoon, they were going to visit the Forbidden City. The last time Jiang Hai came to the imperial capital, he had visited the Forbidden City before. To be honest, the Forbidden City was much smaller than he had imagined. In the past, when he watched TV, he always felt that the Forbidden City was huge. It was the place where the emperor lived. However, after he really went there, he realized that the Forbidden City was actually not that big, including the garden at the back. If he walked fast, he could finish looking at it in half an hour. If he looked at everything, it would be more than an hour. Of course, if he was tired and wanted to rest, it would be different. Of course, even if it was not big in Jiang Hai's eyes, the Forbidden City was still the top of the 5 biggest palaces in the world. The Versailles Palace in France, the Buckingham Palace in the United Kingdom, the Kremlin Palace in Russia, and the White House in the United States were all ranked below the Forbidden City. In Jiang Hai's eyes, these things might be boring, but in the eyes of pure Americans like Delina and the others, the Forbidden City was very magical. Even Alina and Penelope were surprised when they walked in. They kept talking about how majestic and magnificent it was. It seemed that the Forbidden City was still very beautiful to foreigners. The group of 5 walked and stopped. Occasionally, they would look at the souvenir stall at the side. They had a lot of fun. On the other side, Chili deliberately went to a department store of her company. As mentioned before, the Chi group was now mainly in the real estate business. Of course, they were not developers. They didn't have so much money and connections. Their so-called real estate business was to buy some stores and rent them out. Of course, if they just borrowed chickens to lay eggs, they wouldn't make much money. Therefore, they also had a department store. Although it only had 7 floors, It couldn't even be ranked in the top 20 in the imperial capital. However, the interior was still considered complete, and it was considered the largest department store in the vicinity. Of course, they didn't run these stores. These stores were all rented out. They only relied on the rent to maintain the water, electricity, security, and so on. Today, Chili's target was this department store, because she knew that the person in charge of this department store was related to the Yin family. Chapter 429. The Chi family's department store was quite good, although it couldn't be compared with those luxury goods distribution centers. However, in this area, at least within the 3 bus stops on the left, right, front, and back, it was still second to none. The number of customers here every day was not small. Of course, these customers didn't pay the department store for their purchases. The department store mainly relied on rent to make a living, and this was also an important source of income for the Chi family. In this department store, the first floor sold gold and valuable items, such as watches, mobile phones, and so on. There was also a small fruit experience store here. The first floor of the basement was a huge supermarket, and the second and third floors were the parking lot. The second floor sold some first-tier luxury goods, such as donkeys, crying horse poop, and so on. Of course, brands like Patek Philippe were not here. The third floor sold some second-tier brands of clothing, bags, and so on, mainly some Korean brands, and some less famous brands in Europe and the United States. On the second floor, the cheapest clothes were thousands of yuan each. The average price of the clothes here was hundreds of yuan for the cheap ones, and tens of thousands for the good ones. The fourth floor sold some sports equipment, such as treadmills, dumbbells, and so on. Of course, it also sold sports brand clothing, such as Nike, Ada, and so on. They were all sold here, and the things here were the cheapest among the clothes. The fifth floor was the dining area. There were many restaurants here. There were Chinese, Western, fast food, and all kinds of restaurants. Not only did they have to take care of the foreign customers, but the people who opened shops here would also eat here. The sixth floor was a huge indoor game hall. It was similar to the game halls where Jiang Hai and the others played the King of Fighters and the War of the Three Kingdoms when they were young. But now it was bigger. Naturally, there were also arcade games, but there were more like claw machines, fishing, turntables, guessing right, fruit machines, and so on. As for the game machines, the most popular ones were driving, riding motorcycles, horse racing, and shooting. It was like the oldest game machines. Although there were still some, there were not many people playing it. On the 7th floor was a movie theater. In Huaxia, there was not only one movie theater but many others. There was one upstairs in the Chi family. It was also a favorite place for young couples to hang out. It was cheaper than Wanda, and the environment was similar. Therefore, the attendance rate here was not low. As for the building's security and management personnel's offices, they were on the other side of the partition between the 6th and 7th floors. Although the Chi group was a company controlled by the family, other than the Chi family who had a lot of shares, other people also had a lot of shares. In the company, besides Chi Li's family, the person who owned the second most stocks was none other than Chi Song, Chi Li's eldest uncle, whom Jiang Hai had met before. This time, Chi Li was going to find Chi Song's son, her cousin Chi Liangkai. Don't forget that this guy was very close to An Zhongwu. Last time when they had a face-to-face confrontation, Chi Li directly kicked him out of the Chi group. Although he no longer held a position in the Chi group, he became the general manager of this department store. Although he had no right to speak in the head office, he seemed to have more power. Chi Li came to him, just to let him tell An Zhongwu the news. He believed that the fish would be hooked. Therefore, when Chi Li walked into this department store, he already knew the news of Chi Li's arrival. As for Chi Li, it was impossible for Chi Liangkai not to hate her, just like how Chi Song hated Chi Li's father. It was Chi Liangkai who brought Chi Liangkai up, but now Chi Liangkai was riding on his head. As for Chi Liangkai, he had always regarded himself as the eldest son of the Chi family. When Chi Li's father died, he should be the one who inherited the company. How could a woman come over and take away the company that should have belonged to him? He refused to accept it and was not happy, so he colluded with An Zhongwu later. Now that Chi Li came here, He was a little surprised. According to his subordinates, Chili went straight to the area on the second floor and began to pick up evening gowns, which made him even more confused. With doubts in his heart, he couldn't help walking out of his office and taking the elevator to the second floor. He wanted to see what Chili was going to do. When he walked over, he realized that there were quite a few people gathered outside the shop. There were shop assistants nearby, as well as people who were shopping. Regardless of whether they were men or women, they were all looking into the shop from time to time. Their eyes were filled with admiration, envy, and jealousy. When he walked in, he couldn't help but feel his eyes lit up. At this time, he saw Chili standing in the middle of the store. However, at this time, she finally changed out of her unchanged women's suit. At this time, she was wearing a beige tulle top and a long black skirt with a long slit. The simple black and white colors made her look very noble. If she was a queen in the past, she was now an empress. Her tall figure and black skirt swayed from time to time, revealing her slender and long white legs under the skirt. Just her legs alone were estimated to be enough for people to play with for a few years. Her upper body was full, and the clothes were gently stretched out. Through the gap in the middle of the shirt, one could see a rift valley. Although it was not particularly grand, it was definitely not small. It was just right. In addition, her hair was tied up at the back of her head. Although the clothes on her body were simple, they were large and shining brightly. Coupled with an expensive handbag, when she stood there, she really attracted everyone's attention. Looking at Chili in front of him, a trace of greed flashed in Chi Liangsai's eyes. Such a beautiful woman, such a noble woman, if he could have her, it would be cool just thinking about it. However, he knew that it was impossible, because they were cousins. However, if they worked well in the future, it was not completely impossible. But now he had to suppress this desire. Taking a deep breath, Chi Liangsai put on a smile on his face and walked over. Shaoli, how do you have time to shop here? Haven't you been watching your restaurant recently? Looking at Chi Liangsai said with a smile. Hearing his words, the security guards and the staff, who were originally watching, quietly dispersed. Of course, the customers did not bother him. They continued to stand there and look at Chili's figure. She was really too beautiful. Yes, I don't have much time, but Jiang Hai is back. No matter how busy I am, I have to dress up well. Looking at herself in the mirror, Chili couldn't help but chuckle. However, her words were still cold and arrogant as she said to Chi Liangsai, Jiang Hai is back. Why did he come back? Hearing Chili's words, Chi Liangsai narrowed his eyes. He did not have a good impression of Jiang Hai. It's none of your business. Help me check it out. How about it? Why don't I wear this? After saying coldly to Chi Liangsai, Chili looked at the assistant beside her and asked her. At the same time, she kept turning in circles smugly. No one else can wear this. Really? Boss, if you wear this, you must let those people know that you are the most beautiful. Whether it is the Middle East nouveau riche or the top businessman, they will all bow down to you. At that time, let's see how Jiang Hai dares to go out and flirt with other women. Hearing Chi Li's words, the assistant also said with a smile. Hearing her words, Chi Li smiled softly, and then turned in front of the mirror proudly. As for Chi Liangsai, who was standing behind them, after hearing the assistant's words, his eyelids twitched unconsciously. The Middle East nouveau riche, the top businessman? These two words were too sensitive for him. But he would not ask Chili, because he knew that she would not tell him even if he asked. So, he just watched Chili finish her smugness and change her clothes. She was so satisfied with this suit that she naturally bought it. After watching Chili leave happily, Chi Liangsai also made a phone call. The person on the other end of the phone was Zhangwu. After Zhangwu heard Chi Liangsai's words, he could not help but frown. Obviously, he was also very sensitive to these two titles. He asked his brother to check it and got a message. 2 days later, Du Feynman Viha Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum of the royal family of Dubai in the Middle East was going to hold a banquet in the capital. Only the officials in the capital, or the top businessmen, were invited. In other words, only the influential people in the capital were qualified to attend this banquet. Originally, The Qi family and the Yin family were not qualified to attend this banquet. However, for some reason, Qi Li's husband Jiang Hai seemed to have some friendship with this royal family member, so he was also invited to attend this banquet. After hearing this news, the three members of the Yin family were about to go crazy. Now the Yin family had been suppressed by the Qi family. If they did not have better connections than the Qi family, they might not be able to hold on. As a result, if Qi Li and Jiang Hai really attended this banquet, they would be able to get to know some dignitaries and top businessmen. As long as they put in more effort, the Yin family would be doomed. The Yin family might really be finished. The most painful thing was to lose something they had gained before. The three of them discussed for a while. It was impossible for them to stop Jiang Hai and Qi Liangkai from attending, so the only way was for them to attend as well. At the very least, they had to know whether Jiang Hai and Qi Liangkai would harm them if they attended. How could they harm them? They had to know if they were going to die, but it was not easy for them to attend the banquet with their status. Fortunately, there were still 2 days before the banquet started, which was enough time for them to shamelessly ask people to take them in. They no longer considered going in as the guest of honor, but they would also be honored to go in as the attendants. Now that their family had reached the point of life and death, they did not care about their reputation anymore. This was human nature. If Jiang Hai really put this opportunity in front of them, they would think whether it was a trap or a trap. However, if it was an opportunity that they begged for, they would definitely not let it go, even if it was bait. Chapter 430. How is it? Looking at the shocked Jiang Hai in front of her, Qi Li smiled and turned around, then proudly pointed her finger at Jiang Hai, and deliberately tilted her head, revealing her slender neck. What are you doing? Looking at Qi Li's appearance, to be honest, Jiang Hai was a bit surprised, because Qi Li was really beautiful at this time. Qi Li's appearance was not bad. She was more than 170 meters tall, wearing a beige gauze coat and a black gauze long skirt, slightly swaying. The slender asterisk under the long skirt could be seen. Coupled with the jewelry on her body, it was really sparkling. Her originally black long hair was made light brown by her. Obviously, she found a hairstylist to do it. Her long hair was neatly tied behind her head, and she didn't have any bangs, but she deliberately left 2 curly hair hanging on both sides of her cheeks. Coupled with the fruit-colored makeup, it made her look noble and elegant. Most importantly, she was really beautiful. Even Jiang Hai felt his heart beat faster after looking at her. However, as she made this 213 pose, Jiang Hai was a bit confused. What the hell is this? Isn't this the pose of a woman in a cartoon you liked to watch before? No matter what I did before, please forgive me, because this concubine is really beautiful. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Qi Li raised her head again. Psycho. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai couldn't help but wave his hand. He naturally knew who this guy was imitating. The world's #1 beauty in one piece. Snake Princess Boa, Hancock. Although the 2D and 3D worlds are different, Qi Li did have the ability to cosplay, but Jiang Hai didn't buy it. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Qi Li was speechless and curled her lips. She stood up again and looked at Jiang Hai with a smile. In the past, she didn't watch cartoons, and the reason why she knew this was because Jiang Hai said a long time ago that he liked to watch cartoons. In the past, Jiang Hai was really a cartoon fan. Although he hated the island country, he liked the cartoons there very much. In addition to the literary and artistic love-action idol dramas, and the animated version of the literary and artistic love-action idol dramas, he also likes to watch serious cartoons, especially the 3 hot-blooded migrant worker cartoons. He has always liked them, but recently his favorite is One Punch Man. Well, it's almost time, let's go. Looking at Qi Li in front of him, Jiang Hai stood up and walked out of the door. But just as he left, he was stopped by Qi Li. She curiously looked at Jiang Hai. You're going to wear this? Looking at Jiang Hai, Qi Li asked in disbelief. What's wrong with my clothes? Archaeopteryx, the most awesome and shiny outdoor sportswear. This is not cheaper than yours. Hearing Qi Li's words, Jiang Hai took a look at his clothes. It was a specially custom-made coat, waterproof, dirt-proof, has many pockets, And the short-sleeve shirt inside is also waterproof, dissipating, sweat-absorbent, and most importantly, it won't be scratched. The style of pants and shoes is the same as above. This is indeed not cheap. But it's going to a banquet. We're going to a banquet. This has nothing to do with cheap or expensive. Do you want to get a set of, formal clothes? Looking at Jiang Hai, Qili couldn't help but say with some hesitation. If Jiang Hai goes like this, now that she thinks about it, it's really a bit embarrassing. It's okay, let's go. But hearing her words, Jiang Hai smiled and walked straight out of the hotel. But as soon as he walked out, he saw Qili's Rolls-Royce, which is exactly the same as his, parked at the entrance of the hotel. Looking at this car, Jiang Hai didn't get in. Qili, who followed from behind, saw Jiang Hai stop and couldn't help but be stunned. She stood quietly beside Jiang Hai and looked at him strangely. Why didn't he get in the car? This car is not good. Let's change to another one. Shaking his head, Jiang Hai said to Qili, "This car is not good? Then there doesn't seem to be a better car." When Jiang Hai bought this car in the United States, it was about 3 million RMB, but it was sold for 8 million RMB in China. This is indeed the best RV. And the best is the limited edition. The only thing more expensive than this car is the supercar. Isn't it too crazy to drive such a car? No, it's not that this car is not good enough, but this car is too good. You will understand when you get there. Shaking his head, Jiang Hai said to Qili. Indeed, Qili has attended many banquets. She knows more than him. But today she has to listen to him. Then I still have a BMW 7 Series. I will ask them to drive it over. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Qili hesitated, but decided to listen to him. Since Jiang Hai wants to be low-key, then drive a BMW 7 Series. No, it's even worse. About 300,000 RMB. How about a Cadillac? Do you have it? Hearing the words BMW 7 Series, Jiang Hai shook his head. These cars are not good either. After thinking for a while, Jiang Hai told Qili a brand. For Jiang Hai, Cadillac is indeed a medium-sized brand in the United States. It is not too expensive. But in China, an imported Cadillac is worth more than 1 million RMB. But Jiang Hai said that it is only about 300,000 RMB. After thinking for a while, Qili called her company. To be honest, Qili really doesn't know about Cadillac. She must have seen this brand before, but she has never sat in it nor driven it. When she was young, her father drove a Jetta. Later, when she went to college, he changed to a Mercedes-Benz. After she graduated from college, he changed to a Bentley. Her first car in life is the BMW 7 Series that she just mentioned. In China, the Cadillac brand is actually a little awkward. Imported cars cost more than 1 million RMB, and domestic cars cost between 300,000 RMB to 500,000 RMB. But most of the people who bought a car with 300,000 RMB will buy a Japanese car, because it is more cost-effective, faster, and more importantly, it is more fuel-efficient. And the people who bought a car with 500,000 RMB will buy a small Mercedes-Benz or a small BMW. In China, Mercedes-Benz and BMW have always been popular brands. Even if it is not an S-Series, a Mercedes-Benz looks much better than a Cadillac. So Qili really can't get a car like that in a short period of time. She can only call her company and ask if anyone in the company has a car like that. Unexpectedly, she really found a car after she called back. It is driven by a junior manager in the Qi group. After getting the news, Qili immediately called him. It could be imagined that when the person received the call, he was extremely shocked and immediately drove over. Thinking about it, she is very excited. The chairman of the Qi group wants to meet her in front of a hotel. What does he mean? Is he interested in me? Even if he is not interested in me, does he want me to accompany him for a drink? Based on the principle of collecting money based on color, and collecting money based on color, this guy really ran very fast. In less than 15 minutes, a brand new Cadillac stopped in front of the hotel. But when he saw Qili and Jiang Hai standing together, he is a little confused. Does President Qi like to have two people together? Obviously, he is thinking too much. Qili just asked for the keys and left directly without even waving. Just like that, the junior manager stood there and watched Jiang Hai, and Chile get into his newly bought car and drive away. And he stands alone in the wind, speechless as the lights of his car gradually disappear. What is this? Looking at the keys in his hand, the junior manager is speechless. He originally thought that it was a gift from 1,000 miles away. But when he arrived, he realized that the other party was just borrowing the car. And the car was the one that he had just bought. Most importantly, this person was his boss. He did not even have the spirit to resist. In the end, he could only helplessly take a taxi home. Jiang Hai and Chile drove together to the location of the cocktail party. Behind them, a taxi followed them. However, the person in the taxi was not the taxi driver, but Azalina in disguise. Jiang Hai and the others did not forget what their goal was today. The place where Du Feynman held the banquet was in a villa on the outskirts of the imperial city. Of course, the vicinity of this villa had long been cordoned off. These days, Du Feynman had been staying here. For someone of his status, it was indeed inappropriate for him to stay in a hotel, even if it was a high-class hotel. If anything were to happen to him, it would be unacceptable for the imperial court. Everyone knew that the current imperial court was lacking oil. Huaxia had always said that it had vast territory and abundant resources since ancient times. But in fact, the older people understood that this meant that perhaps in the era of cold weapons, Huaxia's territory and population were the guarantee of hegemony. However, in the era of hot weapons, Huaxia could not do it because of the lack of strategic resources. Oil was pitifully little. Strategic minerals such as copper were also pitifully little in this era, where steel was the bone and oil was the blood. Huaxia's resources really had nothing to do with vast territory and abundant resources. For the sake of oil, Huaxia valued Du Feynman more than the average country's leaders. This villa was specially rented for Du Feynman. Naturally, the vicinity was also the focus of the defense of the sea, land, and air forces. When Jiang Hai's car arrived here, there was a special gate to check if there were any dangerous items in the car. Even the large wrench prepared in the trunk was taken out. No weapons were allowed to be in the car. After the check, Jiang Hai and Chile also drove inside. As soon as they arrived at the parking lot, Chile could not help but be stunned. Because in her opinion, for such a high-end cocktail party, the guests would naturally drive good cars. Not to mention the cocktail parties of the Middle East tycoons that she had heard of before. Just for the cocktail parties of people like her. The parking lot outside was filled with Rolls-Royces. Bentleys were even worse than dogs. And they didn't even dare to open their mouths when driving a broken Mercedes. But what was going on now? Chapter 431. Oh my God, why are all these cars? Chile couldn't believe her eyes as she pointed at the parking lot outside. If she didn't know beforehand that this was a top-class cocktail party, she would have thought that this was a birthday party of a township enterprise. Because at this time, there were almost no cars worth more than 500,000 in the parking lot. Looking around, almost 70% of the cars were Audi A6s. All of them were 18 models, and there wasn't even a 2.0 model. Almost all of them were of the same model. The cheapest car was 410,000, and the most expensive one was 460,000. Other than that, most of the cars were Japanese cars, including Jiang Hai's Cadillac, some other American cars, and some domestic cars, such as Volvo and Infiniti. There wasn't a single SUV or Jeep. And there weren't any bad cars. There weren't any cars worth more than 100,000. Basically, all the cars were worth between 200,000 and 400,000. The cars parked here were indeed the same as the cars parked at the entrance of a township's richest man's birthday party. Seeing this, Chile was a little confused. What was going on? She didn't believe that the owners of these cars were poor. But what the hell were they doing driving these cars? Could it be that the Middle Eastern nouveau riche didn't like other people driving luxury cars? Seeing her puzzled expression, Jiang Hai smiled. He actually didn't know either. This was what Du Feynman told him when he called. The reason why he drove these cars was naturally not because Du Feynman didn't like them. It was because the main guests of this cocktail party were different. As mentioned earlier, The people invited by Du Feynman this time were mostly people in the political circle and influential officials in the capital. Other than that, it was important to note that these were the top businessmen. These officials were the main guests. As for the businessmen, they were just accompanying. Under the background of the imperial court, why would the officials drive cars? If the cars were too shabby, people would say that they were fake. If the cars were too good, people would report and investigate them. Therefore, cars worth 300,000 to 500,000 were the most important. And the main source of these cars was the official cars. Of course, the investigation of private use of government vehicles was very strict now. However, if a government vehicle broke down after a year and needed to be replaced, then the broken vehicle would naturally be disposed of very cheaply to the original leader of the unit. This was also a hidden rule. The imperial court also turned a blind eye to it. As long as it was not too ruthless, no one would care. After all, this money was really not much to these high-ranking officials. It was precisely because these people were the main characters that the cars they drove were all of this level. When those businessmen came over, they would drive cars worth 8 million or 10 million. Yes, they knew that they were rich. Why were they showing off here? Whose face are you slapping? Do you still want to do business after you leave this place? You're so arrogant. I'll teach you a lesson. Therefore, all businessmen would be very sensible in such situations. Their cars couldn't be too good, but they couldn't be too bad either. If it was too bad, these officials would recognize them. Wouldn't that be a loss of face? Therefore, he could only be on par with the officials. This was also something that was tacitly agreed upon. Qili had never attended such a high-class event before, so it was natural that she didn't know about it. Under the guidance of the security guard, Jiang Hai drove to the spot that was prepared for him in the parking lot. Du Feynman was obviously very interested in Jiang Hai, because he knew very well that Jiang Hai still had $400 million of oil futures in his hands. Therefore, he didn't treat Jiang Hai lightly at all. The car was parked in the middle of the second row of the parking lot. When the car was parked, two Ford Taurus slowly drove in from a distance, but their positions were much further away, almost at the back. When the two cars were parked, a man in his 30s got out of the first car with his female companion. 3 men got out of the second car. Jiang Hai was very familiar with them, and Qili was even more familiar with them. They were the 3 from the Yin family. When the 3 of them got out of the car, they made eye contact with Jiang Hai. Jiang Hai clenched his fists in an instant, and his body unconsciously emitted a murderous aura. But Qili suppressed it. Now is not the time. Hearing Qili's words, Jiang Hai took a deep breath. He knew that Azalina would help him solve this problem. Then, without saying anything else, he directly led Qili into the villa in front of him. As for the 3 Yin family members in the distance, when they saw Jiang Hai and Qili, their killing intent became even stronger. Especially when they saw that Jiang Hai's car was parked in the second row. They really hated him to the point that the roots of their teeth itched. They really didn't expect that Jiang Hai would actually climb up the social ladder. Let's go. Don't talk nonsense after you go in. If it weren't for our family owing you a favor, would you still want to come in? Just as the 3 from the Yin family were glaring at Jiang Hai, the man in front of them said faintly. Then, he looked at the 3 from the Yin family with slight disgust, and walked in with his female companion. Although the 3 of them felt their faces hurt, especially in Deshuan, they could only smile and nod in agreement. Then they followed the man into the villa. Although the villa didn't look very big from the outside, after walking in, one would find that it was a different world inside. After passing the security check and walking through the door, what greeted Jiang Hai and Qili was a huge hall. This hall was about 5,000 square meters. In the middle was a long table with fruits and cold dishes. The 4 corners also had different kinds of food. One of the corners was a bar with 3 bartenders working hard to mix drinks. It was an excellent place to create an atmosphere. On the other side, there was a barbecue chef grilling skewers. Perhaps only the people from the new province knew how much the Arabians liked to eat barbecue. On the huge skewer, there were all kinds of barbecue skewers. Several Arabian chefs were working hard to grill the meat. Many young people gathered there, They were also very interested in the food. Then, in the other two corners, one was baking cakes and bread on the spot, and the other was making teppanyaki. It could be said that Du Feynman's banquet wasn't as simple as just drinking. He seemed to be very interested in eating. After Chili walked into the hall, she felt that her eyes weren't enough. This was because at this time, there were almost 100 people gathered in the hall. These people were both men and women. Some were gathered together, while others were looking for food. Among them, there were many people in their 40s and 50s. Chili felt that they were familiar, but she was very sure that she didn't know them. In her opinion, there was only one possibility, which was that she had seen them on TV before. In addition, there were some people that she had only heard of before. These people were the top tycoons in the capital's business circle. Although there weren't any particularly famous people on the surface, these people's personal wealth was definitely more than 20 billion yuan. Although it wasn't much more than Chili's family wealth, don't forget that Chili's wealth was in the family. The money mainly didn't belong to her, but to her mother and her two younger sisters. How much could her family wealth be? Moreover, 10 billion yuan was actually just a starting point in the circle of these tycoons. Only those with more than 1 million yuan were considered second class. Only those with more than 2 million yuan, or even 30 billion yuan, could touch the edge of the top circle. Usually, no matter if these people attended any cocktail party that Qi Li and the others could attend, they would definitely be the finale. But at this time, they were just some small side characters, nothing more. Hey, Niece Qi, why are you here? Just when Qi Li felt that her eyes weren't enough, a slightly unexpected voice came from the side. Then, a middle-aged man who looked to be in his 50s or 60s with a balding head and a beer belly came over. There was a trace of surprise and doubt in his eyes. Hey, Uncle Zhou, you're here too. Let me introduce you. This is my husband, Jiang Hai. This is Uncle Zhou, Zhou Yu, who is now the director of the Ministry of Land and Resources. Looking at the middle-aged man, Chili smiled and immediately introduced him. At the same time, she hinted at Jiang Hai with her eyes. In fact, Jiang Hai had heard of this person before. But not from Chili, but from Chili's mother. This person should be the protector of the Qi family in the capital. This person was also from the military. He had once been saved by Chili's father. Later on, when he arrived at the capital, he sought refuge with him. That was how the Qi family became what it was today. After all, this person came from the army and was very loyal. If it wasn't for him, the Qi family might have been finished when Qi Li's father died. Later, it was said that he had always wanted his son to marry Qi Li, but with Jiang Hai, this matter was finally left unsettled. You're Mr. Zhou? Oh hello, I've heard of you. Niece Qi is a good person. You must be good to her. Hearing Qi Li's words, Zhou Yu also smiled and took the initiative to stretch out his hand. After shaking hands with Jiang Hai, he said with a serious face, sure. Hearing his words, what can Jiang Hai say? My marriage with Qi Li is just a fake one. Stop fooling around. At this time, he has to give some face to the other party. Although it is a little awkward, Jiang Hai can only say with a smile, Dad, you're here, hey? Xiaoli is also here. I originally wanted to call you and invite you to come together, but my dad said that he was afraid that you would be uncomfortable if you came. So I didn't call. This is... Just as the two shook hands, another voice came, and then a man who looked a little like Zhou Yu, but much younger, came over. This man was more than 8 meters tall, and his body was very well proportioned. The most important thing was that his eyes were bright, and his body looked very strong. He was wearing a formal suit, and was holding 2 glasses of mixed wine in his hands. He was a sunny and handsome man. Along the way, he attracted a lot of attention, but when he saw Qi Li, his eyes began to shine. Chapter 432. This is my husband, Jiang Hai. This is Zhou Xian, Uncle Zhou Yu's son. Looking at the handsome young man walking over, Qi Li's face was slightly embarrassed. Speaking of which, Zhou Xian was quite good in this circle. Perhaps it was because his father was from the military, so he did not have the habit of spoiling his son. Since young, Zhou Xian did not have a bad reputation like those second generations. Instead, he had a good reputation. He had been good at his studies since elementary school. At the same time, he was not bad-looking. He also had sports talents, basketball and football. When he was in university, he even participated in Cuba and was the team's #1 scorer. However, when he got older, he did not go to the CBA to develop his career. There was nothing bad about his private life. He did not smoke, nor was he debauched. He also did not have any bad side effects. Now he was working in the Ministry of Land. Although he was only a small staff member, with his father's connections, no one dared to look down on him or exclude him. When he had nothing to do, his hobby was to exercise. He ran every morning, ran at night, and played basketball in the afternoon after work. His life was very healthy. This was what Zhou Yu was most proud of in this circle. His son did not have to worry about anything. Qi Li and he met in high school. At that time, Qi Li's father was already relying on Zhou Yu. The relationship between the two families was quite good. From the first time he saw Qi Li, Zhou Xian liked Qi Li. However, Qi Li did not like such a hypocrite. After going to university, Qi Li went abroad and met in Changgu. When she came back, Zhou Xian was very sad. However, with Zhou Yu's character, he would not do anything to steal his love. Therefore, he could not do anything when he saw his son in pain. Later, after the change in the Qi family, he thought it was an opportunity to let Qi Li marry his son. Unfortunately, Qi Li's mother would definitely not let her family's foundation be taken advantage of by others. This was because she knew that although Zhou Yu and Zhou Xian were good people, once she married into their family, Zhou Xian would have the final say. At that time, it would only be a matter of time before the Qi family changed its name to the Zhou family. That was why they chose Jiang Hai, who had no chance. Jiang Hai was a good person. He didn't have any power or background. Furthermore, he knew everything about him. He wasn't a bad person. Even if she could be used to shut the mouths of the Qi Li family members, she had no ambition. Even if she had a child with Qi Li in the future, even if the child's surname was Jiang, wouldn't it be up to them to educate the child? Jiang Hai was basically a bad guy. He didn't have any right to speak. It could be seen that the person who controlled Jiang Hai's fate was actually Qi Li's mother. One had to admit that the older the wiser. Oh hello. My name is Zhou Xian. I'm now working in the Ministry of Land and Resources. Hearing Qi Li's introduction, Zhou Xian's eyes couldn't help but stagnate. Then he sized up Jiang Hai and reached out his hand confidently. In fact, he didn't think that there was anything to be unconfident about, because he knew about Jiang Hai's situation in the past. He was a bachelor and didn't even have a job. He had to rely on Qi Li to live off her. Now it seemed that other than being taller than him, he didn't seem to have any advantages. He wasn't as handsome as him, and his background was even worse. The most important thing was this guy's brain short-circuited? What the hell is he wearing on such an occasion? My name is Jiang Hai. I raise cattle. Looking at his appearance, Jiang Hai couldn't help but smile. Was he born to attract criticism? The moment the two shook hands, Jiang Hai felt that Zhou Xian was slowly increasing his strength. This made Jiang Hai a little speechless. In the past, he had only heard of such a melodramatic plot on TV or in novels. He didn't expect that he would actually encounter it. However, Jiang Hai wasn't a pushover. If you increase your strength, then I will also increase my strength. Twice the strength of the human limit. Was it something that two people who like to exercise could compare with? In an instant, Jiang Hai increased his strength, and this person's face turned purple. Cough, Niece Qi, let me introduce you to the people here. Since you are here, don't waste this opportunity. Seeing that his son had actually suffered a loss in the hands of Jiang Hai, Zhou Yu immediately said. People were biased. Although Zhou Yu was not a bad person, he definitely had to stand on his son's side. Originally, his son wanted to compare notes with Jiang Hai, so it was inconvenient for him to speak. However, his son was at a disadvantage, so he had to make a move. Hearing his words, Zhou Xian instantly withdrew his hand, and then gently put it behind his back. If someone was behind him at this time, they would definitely see that there was an obvious purple circle on Zhou Xian's hand. This was caused by Jiang Hai's pinch. Looking at his appearance, Jiang Hai couldn't help but chuckle. blindly showing off. Was his strength something that he could compare with? In fact, Jiang Hai had only used less than 30% of his strength to pinch like this. If Jiang Hai had used more strength, he would have crushed Zhou Xian's hand with 50% of his strength. Looking at Jiang Hai in front of him, Zhou Xian couldn't help but curse in his heart. He was really useless. An old cow raiser dared to come here, and dared to be so arrogant. However, he had to admit that this cow raiser's strength was really great. "Oh, Uncle Zhou, there's no need. I still have to accompany my husband." Hearing Zhou Yu's words, Qi Li also smiled and refused. Hearing what she said, Zhou Yu and Zhou Xian were a bit surprised. It had to be known that being able to sneak in was not an easy matter. Any one of the people inside would have to stomp their feet and walk around unsteadily on the outside. What did she say now? In order to accompany Jiang Hai, she didn't want to get to know the people here? Did this Qi Li become stupid after marriage? Shaoli, you should go and get to know some people. This place is only so big. Brother Jiang Hai won't get lost, right? Seeing Qi Li's determined look, Zhou Xian shook his wrist and said with a serious face, even though he had just suffered a loss. At the same time, he looked at Jiang Hai with a red gaze. What was a cow raiser doing here? "Hey, Mr. Jiang, you're here. Why are you only here now?" However, before he could finish speaking, he was interrupted by someone. Zhou Xian couldn't help but turn around to look at the source of the voice with some anger. In the end, he found that the person who interrupted him was about the same age as his father. At this time, he was running toward Jiang Hai with a smile. It was obvious that he attached great importance to Jiang Hai. Although Zhou Xian didn't know who this person was, Zhou Yu did. When he saw this person coming over, he subconsciously stood at attention. "Oh, you just came over. Where's Du Feimin?" Looking at this person, Jiang Hai also smiled. This person was no stranger to Jiang Hai, because this person was the person in charge who had talked to him about persuading Du Feimin that day. Jiang Hai didn't know what this person's job was. Jiang Hai also didn't know what this person's position was. However, looking at Zhou Yu's appearance, it was clear that this person's rank was definitely not low. Seeing this person walk over quickly, Jiang Hai also smiled and greeted him. "Mr. Makdam is in the room, discussing with the representatives of the imperial court. When will you?" This person looked at Jiang Hai and spoke very carefully. After all, the relationship between Jiang Hai and Du Feimin was one of their bargaining chips. "Then let's talk about it later. I'm a little hungry. I'm going to get some food." Looking at the food around him, Jiang Hai smiled and took the initiative to speak. Hearing this person smiled and tactfully retreated. However, before he left, he saw Zhou Yu standing to the side. "Minister Qin, hello." Looking at the person in front of him, Zhou Yu's face was filled with smiles as he spoke modestly. "Oh, hello. You are." Zhou Yu recognized this middle-aged man, but the middle-aged man didn't recognize him. So he asked with some confusion. "My name is Zhou Yu. I'm from the Ministry of Land and Resources." Hearing the middle-aged man's words, Zhou Yu immediately introduced himself. "Oh, old Zhang's subordinate. You know Mr. Jiang? Then you've got it right." Hearing his introduction, this person couldn't help but smile and pat his head. Then he looked at Jiang Hai and joked with him with a smile. Although he was half joking, Zhou Yu clearly heard some things from this person's words. For example, this Jiang Hai was definitely not simple. Not only did he know Minister Qin, but it seemed that Minister Qin had a favor to ask of him. At the same time, the most important thing was that Du Feimin, who he just mentioned, was very likely to be the protagonist of this banquet. Thinking of this, a thin layer of sweat appeared on Zhou Yu's forehead. Who exactly was this Jiang Hai? Was he really a guy with nothing to do? Or was he, as he said, a cattle farmer? When did a cattle farmer become friends with a rich man from the Middle East? And what they said could reach the heavens? Wasn't this bullshit? Dad, after joking around with Zhou Yu, Minister Qin left. As for Zhou Xian, he walked over to Zhou Yu, who was still in a daze, and softly called out to him. Hearing his son's words, Zhou Yu recovered from his shock. This Jiang Hai is definitely not an ordinary person. You just offended him. You'd better leave first. Pulling his puzzled son over, Zhou Yu leaned over and whispered in his ear. Hearing his father's words, Zhou Xian felt helpless, regretful, jealous, and scared. He was helpless because he knew that if Jiang Hai's identity was really not simple, then it would never be possible for him and Qi Li. He regretted it because he was blinded by his jealousy and anger. Why did he offend Jiang Hai? He was jealous because he didn't know what kind of luck this guy had. He actually had Minister Qin backing him up. Although Minister Qin did not know them, the father and son knew him. He was the deputy minister of the Ministry of State Security. Was that a joke? He was scared because he was really scared that Jiang Hai would deal with him. So after hearing Zhou Yu's words, he hesitated for a moment and quickly left. Although it was pitiful to lose this opportunity, he had to be alive. However, it was obvious that Zhou Xian was thinking too much because Jiang Hai really did not have the intention to deal with him at this time. Of course, if he kept appearing in front of him, then it would be hard to say. After meeting with Minister Qin, Jiang Hai went to the front of the restaurant and prepared to start sweeping the goods. When others came to such a banquet, talking was the most important thing, but for Jiang Hai, eating was the most important thing. One had to admit that Du Feimin was very rich, and the people of the imperial court were very sincere. Although this banquet was held in the name of Du Feimin, the ingredients were truly the best ingredients in the country. Oh no, it could be said that they were the best ingredients in the world. In the long and cold dining hall, there were all kinds of food. The most eye-catching was the various kinds of sashimi, bluefin tuna sashimi. The whole tuna looked no smaller than the ones in Jiang Hai's manor. The head and tail were still intact, but the meat on the body had been sliced into small thin slices, folded in half, and placed in the middle of the fish. Next to the tuna, there were lobster sashimi, Arctic scallop sashimi, mullet roe, sturgeon roe, handheld sushi and so on. At a glance, it really made people feel a little cold. Because Jiang Hai didn't eat raw food, no matter how valuable these things were, he didn't care about them. In addition to these sashimi and sushi, there were chocolate waterfalls, various fruit plates, cold dishes, sausages, and so on in front of him. Well, in fact, Jiang Hai didn't know much. He wasn't very clear about the specific things here. There were many things he hadn't seen before. But it didn't matter as long as they were delicious. So he walked along the table and ate. As he ate, a figure blocked his way. "Hey, I'm still looking for you. Brother, you're really late." Looking up, Jiang Hai saw Du Feimin's face. At this time, the Arabian royal was still wearing the same white robe as Jiang Hai saw him. Seeing Jiang Hai, he couldn't help but smile and pat Jiang Hai's shoulder enthusiastically. Jiang Hai was a little confused about his attitude, because the relationship between the two wasn't so close. They only had a relationship of buying and selling, and they had only met 3 times. His enthusiasm now made Jiang Hai a little confused. "Am I late?" "It's okay. I'm not here to look for someone. I'm here to eat." While stuffing some Goliath ham into his mouth, Jiang Hai said vaguely. No matter what he was planning, he would just go along with it. "I can see that you are indeed different, but you didn't eat the best food here." Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Du Feimin led Jiang Hai to a pile of sashimi. "Oh, Du Feimin, I don't eat raw things, so forget about the sashimi. Besides, there are also bluefin golden spears in my manor." Waving his hand, Jiang Hai indicated that Du Feimin didn't need to introduce him. He was indeed not used to eating raw things. "Hey brother, don't worry, I won't cheat you. Come and have a taste. If you don't like it, then forget it. Besides, I won't let you eat bluefin." However, when Du Feimin heard Jiang Hai's words, he shook his head and mysteriously led him to the front of a sashimi. This sashimi wasn't like the bluefin or lobster beside it. It didn't have a lobster head, or a fish head to let people know what it was at first glance. This plate of sashimi was just a thin plate of fish, nothing more. "What is this?" Looking at the fish fillet in front of him, Jiang Hai asked with some confusion. "Unparalleled delicacy." Looking at Jiang Hai, Du Feimin smiled and directly picked up a piece with his hand. After dipping it in the sauce that had been prepared for him, he stuffed it into his mouth with a satisfied expression. Looking at his appearance, Jiang Hai also picked up a piece with his chopsticks, dipped it in some seasoning, and put it into his mouth. As soon as it entered his mouth, there was a fishy taste, which made Jiang Hai frown slightly. However, he didn't want to embarrass Du Feimin, so he gently took a bite. This bite made Jiang Hai's eyes light up instantly. The fish meat was like tendons. When Jiang Hai took a bite, not only did it have a bit of chewiness, which was very rare in fish meat, but this meat could be chewed in an instant after chewing. Every fiber of the fish meat would bounce against the teeth. This kind of texture would make people chew continuously subconsciously. Jiang Hai was the same. After chewing 3 times, the original fishy taste had completely disappeared, leaving only a fresh taste. Fresh, especially fresh. The fish meat was smooth, bouncy, and a bit chewy. Even the abalones raised by Jiang Hai weren't as fresh as this. This made Jiang Hai extremely surprised. After eating 1 piece, he unexpectedly picked up his chopsticks and ate a second piece. Looking at Jiang Hai's satisfied expression, Du Feimin also smiled and started eating. Okay, let's eat. What kind of meat is this? Why is it so delicious? While chewing the fish meat in front of him, to be honest, although this meat was not as good as Jiang Hai's strongest beef, in terms of fish meat, it was already better than any fish meat that Jiang Hai had ever eaten. This made him a little curious. Of course, if he was curious, he wouldn't just ask. He could introduce it. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Du Feimin stuffed the fish meat into his mouth and said with a smile, "This is a pufferfish." However, after hearing his words, Jiang Hai's chopsticks couldn't help but pause. As mentioned before, Jiang Hai was a timid person. He was very afraid of death. This game was poisonous. It was different from soaking in alcohol. If he wasn't careful, he would die from eating it. This made him a little confused. Seeing Jiang Hai's surprised expression, Du Feimin said with a smile, "Don't worry, the chef who made this has a professional license." Moreover, before the dish was served, he had already eaten it an hour in advance. If nothing happened, it would be served. Otherwise, do you think your court would let it go easily if someone here was poisoned to death? Indeed, if anything were to happen to any of the people present today, it would be a huge shock to the country. However, today, Jiang Hai wanted to make it a shock. Of course, he didn't use this kind of fish meat. Sigh. I originally wanted to bring some back to raise, but it looks like it's impossible. Hearing Du Feimin's words, Jiang Hai sighed. It's possible to import it. This thing can be found everywhere, both in the country and abroad. However, there is a problem. That is, there are too few people who can make this thing. If Jiang Hai eats this thing, the gains won't make up for the losses. Sigh, this is nothing. This is only ranked in the top 10 of today's food. It's not even in the top 10. Let's go, I'll take you to eat something good. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Du Feimin smiled, then took the initiative to bring Jiang Hai to the teppanyaki. Seeing Du Feimin bring Jiang Hai over, the chef who was cooking couldn't help but nod. Then, he took out a plate of freshly made fried fish and handed it over. Looking at this plate of fried fish, many people who were just wandering nearby stopped. They looked at the fish in front of them in surprise, because these fish weren't very famous to foreigners. However, to the people in the country, this fish was actually a real ingredient with a sky-high price. Come try it. Actually, I heard that this kind of fish is best braised, but I don't like it. It's better this way. Dragging Jiang Hai along, Du Feimin arrived in front of the counter, picked up a fork, and began to eat. Jiang Hai also picked up a fish and put it in his mouth. In an instant, a freshness that was different from the blowfish filled his mouth. Chapter 434. Well, this fish tastes good, but it has too many bones. You foreigners don't like to eat fish with bones, right? After taking a bite, Jiang Hai asked Du Feimin in front of him, while picking out the bones. This fish does taste fresh and quite good, but it has too many bones, which is troublesome to eat. Haha, that's why I fry it like this. After the bones are crisped, the taste is still very good. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Du Feimin also said with a smile, "This fish is best braised, but this is the reason why it is fried." What kind of fish is this? Jiang Hai is not used to eating fish with bones, so he said while picking out the bones, "This is Chongjiang swordfish." Hearing Zhang Tai's words, Chi Li, who had been picking out fish bones and eating fish behind Zhang Tai, interjected. Changjiang swordfish? This is Changjiang swordfish? Hearing Qi Li's words, Jiang Hai can't help but be surprised. Changjiang swordfish has been very popular in recent years. It has grown from dozens of yuan per catty to hundreds, thousands, and even tens of thousands. Before going abroad, Jiang Hai had heard of Changjiang swordfish, and specially went to the seafood market to have a look. However, there is no Changjiang swordfish in the seafood market of Bing City. Only swordfish, but the swordfish is not expensive. He later learned about it. Although it is called Changjiang swordfish, in fact, this fish has nothing to do with swordfish. The so-called swordfish refers to hairtail, which can grow to more than 1 meter long, and has a large yield. It is one of the most productive marine fish. It is mainly produced in the western Pacific Ocean and the Indian Ocean. Basically, it is located in warm waters, and can also be cultivated. Jiang Hai's manor is located in the Atlantic Ocean. There is also this fish, but it is very rare. This fish's taste is ordinary, and the meat is also very ordinary, so Jiang Hai usually does not catch it. Just like the hairtail in Jiang Hai's manor, the biggest one is almost 1.5 meters long. Jiang Hai does not know how big it will grow. Anyway, Jiang Hai does not intend to eat it. The Yangtze River grenadier fish is not this kind of hairtail fish. It is a kind of freshwater fish, and its scientific name is the long-jawed fish. Although this type of fish was very valuable in China, it was not the only type of fish in China. This type of fish could be found in the whole of Asia, and even the whole world. This type of fish could be found in the Yangtze River basin of Huaxia, Malaysia, Borneo, Phuket, and even the Amazon River basin. However, other than in China, there were no overseas markets for this type of fish. But now that it was mentioned, Jiang Hai was a little tempted. He was afraid that the pufferfish would be poisonous, but there was nothing wrong with raising this fish. Is it very difficult to breed? There was no such thing in Jiang Hai's dictionary. Once spiritual energy appeared, everything would have to bow down. Looks like I'm going to build a river in the manor. After thinking for a while, Jiang Hai muttered in his heart. Originally, he wanted to make a freshwater river because he wanted to eat eels, so he had to breed them himself. But this was just an idea. After all, it was impossible for him to make a river just to eat eels. It would cost a lot of money. Although Jiang Hai was not short of money, he didn't need to waste too much money. After all, no one ate eels in Boston. Foreigners didn't eat eels. Jiang Hai remembered watching a program about food. Huaxia and French chefs competed. They chose ingredients for each other. As a result, after the French got the eels, they didn't know how to cook them. Western food was different from place to place. But if the first Western food was French and Italian, even the French chefs didn't know how to cook eels. What kind of market would there be in the United States? Therefore, it was not Jiang Hai's style to only go out and not go in. But now it seemed that it was a good idea to build a river. He could raise some freshwater, very valuable fish, and sell them to Chile. Thinking about it, once the Yangtze River grenadier fish was launched in the restaurant, it was estimated that the price could be increased many times. Moreover, there was no need to build a river, divert water, or pump water. There were many small rivers in the Boston area. He could just draw one over. If he didn't want to draw water, he could dig a river himself. The underground water was also quite rich. How much would it cost to dig a river? Jiang Hai didn't care about this. After memorizing the scientific name of the long-jawed swordfish in his mind, Jiang Hai began to focus his attention on other things. Not to mention, when he looked at it, he really saw a cooked fish. This fish looks a bit like the American red fish, but it's not quite the same. He picked up a piece and took a bite. Jiang Hai couldn't help but nod. The taste of this fish is also good. This is a large yellow croaker. Recently it's very expensive. The molded ones are sold for nearly 1,000 yuan per catty, and the smaller ones are sold for about 800 yuan. Seeing that Jiang Hai seemed to be very satisfied, Qi Li hurriedly said, "This is not bad, I can raise it." Hearing Qi Li's words, Jiang Hai was shocked. To be honest, the taste of yellow croaker was better than the average American red fish, but it was almost the same as the American red fish raised by Jiang Hai, or even slightly worse. However, no matter how good the American red fish was, it only sold for 60 yuan per catty in China. In the United States, it was about $10 per catty, which was much more expensive than cod. However, this yellow croaker, which was also a member of the family Cyprinidae, could be sold for 10 times the price of the American red fish. Again, Jiang Hai could raise any fish, so he couldn't help but be tempted. If Jiang Hai wanted to raise 1,000,000 of them, other people would only be able to raise them up to 8 ounces in a year. However, Jiang Hai would have no problem raising them up to 2 catties. 1 catty was $80, 2 catties would be $160. 1,000,000 of them would be $160. What if he raised 2,000,000 fish or 3,000,000 fish? In the past, Jiang Hai had always thought that his main source of income was on land. This was because beef was very valuable, but now his cattle had almost reached their limit. Therefore, he had to think of other ways to earn money. The fish in the sea were very good. If he could raise these fish, or even raise bluefin fishes, just supplying them to Japan and Huaxia would be enough for him to earn as much as he did on land. Now that he thought about it, he had no choice but to choose the American red fish, because there were not many types of fish sold in the United States. They had to ensure their own species characteristics, and could not casually introduce foreign species. What if one day, these fish were worthless, just like the Asian carp now? Who could they go to cry to? Looking at the food in front of him, Jiang Hai's mind was spinning. Originally, when he asked Minister Qin to import domestic species, Jiang Hai's first thought was goats, pigs, and the like. Now it seemed that he was stupid. Even if he wanted to import, he had to import these things. He was really too naive back then. The taste of this fish is indeed not bad, but because it has too many bones, I only ranked it 10th among today's ingredients. Let's go, I'll bring you to the 9th place. After patting Jiang Hai, Du Feimin continued to bring Jiang Hai to the barbecue area in the distance. The barbecue chef here was brought over by Du Feimin from Arabia, and the ingredients were also brought over by him from Arabia. This is today's 9th delicacy, camel hump. After bringing Jiang Hai here, a waiter respectfully took 3 skewers of meat from the grill and placed them on a plate. Then he passed them to Jiang Hai, Qi Li and Du Feimin. Camel hump. Looking at the meat in front of him, Jiang Hai hesitated for a moment. He indeed knew that Arabian barbecue was the best. Speaking of which, Arabian barbecue was the best in the world. It was not a joke, but camel hump. He knew that this thing was edible. In the ancient Manchu and Han imperial banquets, the first of the 8 treasures was camel hump. However, to be honest, when Jiang Hai imagined the appearance of camel hump, he really did not feel like eating it. Seeing that Jiang Hai was a little hesitant, Du Feimin took a bite first, and then said with a smile, "Try it, it's very good." Seeing that Du Feimin had eaten, Jiang Hai also took a bite, after hesitating for a moment. However, other than the resistance in his heart, when the camel hump entered his mouth, Jiang Hai's eyes could not help but light up. This meat was indeed very delicious. Camel hump was the place where camels stored energy, nutrients, and water. There were no bones here, only meat and fat. However, due to the constant storage of water throughout the year, the lean meat here naturally had the effect of tenderness and powder. The meat was very soft. The fat on the outside, after being roasted, turned into oil, but it was not greasy. In ancient times, some aristocrats liked to eat this thing very much. Of course, there were very few people who ate this thing now. After all, not many people raised camels. Camel hump was rich in protein, fat, calcium, scale, iron, vitamin A, B1, B2, and niacin. The gelatinous fat in the meat was also known as hump oil. It was sweet and non-toxic. It had the effect of moisturizing dryness, cooling the wind, promoting blood circulation, and eliminating germs. It was a rare delicacy. Jiang Hai was very satisfied with this meat. However, he did not intend to raise camels. It was not easy to raise them. Most importantly, Jiang Hai did not lack meat. This is the 9th one, and the one I ranked second is the Kobe beef. However, your beef is not worse than this one. So I guess you have long been tired of eating it. Looking at Jiang Hai's satisfied expression, Du Feimin smiled and pointed to another row of meat skewers. He specially went to Japan to buy this meat. The price was not cheap. However, although eating this kind of beef was very normal for Jiang Hai, he still made a skewer and ate it. He had never eaten Kobe beef before. He wanted to try it and see if it tasted good. Generally speaking, it tasted similar to his own beef. However, there were some subtle differences. After all, it was not the same breed of beef. However, the texture was almost the same. Of course, the taste was far worse, because one was made by Jiang Hai, and the other was made by a chef. However, compared to Chi Li's restaurant, the taste was not much different. Chi Li also ate a piece, and nodded on the surface. However, in her heart, she had already made up her mind. She must tie Jiang Hai, not only for him, but also for his cows. Chapter 435. Come on. Try this. After eating the second and ninth dishes in Du Feimin's heart, Du Feimin continued to bring Jiang Hai to a place further away. This was the eighth dish in his heart, fish lips. Fish lips had a long history in Huaxia. It was part of the Four Treasures series, just like the camel hump. However, it was part of the Eight Treasures series. The so-called fish lips were made from the lips of sharks or some large fish, including the skin, eyes, and cheeks. Among them, sharks and rays belong to the normal species. Other than that, they could also be made from sturgeon, and large yellow croaker. Among them, not many people knew about the sturgeon. This fish looked like a huge sturgeon. It was only found in Huaxia's Heilongjiang province, the border between Russia, and in Europe. It was divided into two groups. This type of fish could grow very big. The heaviest fish could reach 1 ton. It had a long lifespan, a strong body, great strength, and a large appetite. It was said that this type of fish had existed for hundreds of millions of years. It was known as the living fossil in the water. The original type of Ice City's expensive fish. There were not many of this type of fish, and the price varied. There was no accurate price. The cheap ones were a few dozen RMB per catty, and the expensive ones were a few hundred RMB per catty. There was no fixed price. The fish lips that Jiang Hai and the rest were eating were from this type of fish. The taste was quite good. However, it was impossible to taste this thing. After all, it was not easy to get. The seventh dish on Du Feimin's menu was a vegetarian dish. It was a type of mushroom called cloud incense mushroom. Perhaps even a professional mushroom farmer wouldn't know about this. This thing was also one of the 4 treasures, belonging to the 8 treasures of grass. It was very rare, and there was no way to cultivate it. It was just like pine mills. Of course, pine mills grew from pine trees. There were plenty of pine trees, so there were plenty of pine mills. Therefore, although there was no way to cultivate them, pine mills were still sold. In Du Feimin's eyes, the 6th dish was a type of bird, quail. This type of bird tasted good when roasted. Of course, the main thing was that the chef's skills were good enough. The 5th was fish roe. There was no need to talk about it. Sturgeon, salmon, and mullet were all very good fish roe. They also tasted very fragrant. In 4th place was the flying dragon. Jiang Hai had a lot of them. Well, not exactly a lot, but at least he had something to eat. The 3rd was truffle, the so-called truffle cake. Jiang Hai went to eat it. Although he was a little surprised that this plant was so expensive, to be honest, the truffle's taste was ordinary to him. At least he wasn't as obsessed as Westerners. On the other hand, it could be seen that Jiang Hai was only interested in meat. However, after knowing the price of this thing, he also considered if he should plant some in his own forest. Truffles were of different sizes and had different prices. Truffles with a diameter of more than 5 centimeters were far more expensive than those with a diameter of 1 to 2 centimeters. A kilogram of 1 to 2 centimeters of black truffles was about $500, which was a pretty good price. But for truffles with a diameter of more than 5 centimeters, 2 zeros would be added to the price, which was $50,000 per kilogram. 1 gram of gold was worth $200, so 1 kilogram was only $200,000. $50,000 per kilogram of black truffle was equivalent to $300,000. It wasn't wrong to say that truffles were more expensive than gold. As for white truffles, they were even more expensive. In 2007, 1.5 kilograms of white truffle was sold for $330,000. That was in 2007. If it were now, the price would be at least 50% higher. 150 grams of white truffle was worth $500,000. 1 gram of white truffle was worth $333, which was about $2,000. It was *T to say that it was equivalent to diamonds, but it was definitely comparable to platinum. This was the delicacy that Du Feynman placed third. The second was Kobe beef, which Du Feynman had already introduced. Finally, the first was a soup. Although it was a cocktail party hosted by Du Feynman, this soup was only available to those who were invited. But Jiang Hai could drink as much as he wanted. Jiang Hai glanced at it. He recognized the sea cucumber and black chicken. But there was something else that Jiang Hai wasn't too sure about. What is this? Jiang Hai asked Du Feynman as he scooped out the thing with a spoon. Ah, this is the most valuable thing in this soup. I heard that you Huaxia people call this flour glue. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Du Feynman said with a serious face. In order to buy this thing, his heart ached a little. Pepper? Isn't that a small grain? Hearing Du Feynman's words, Jiang Hai was a little confused. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Qi Li's eyes lit up and she explained to him. It's flour glue, the glue of glue, a kind of tonic made from fish maw. As the old saying goes, the belly of abalone, ginseng, and shark fin is the belly of the belly. This thing is also called fish maw. Flour glue is fish maw, one of the 8 treasures of the sea. It was made from the swim bladders of large fish. Different fish made from different materials naturally had different prices. The more common ones were fish maw and eel maw. The better ones were large yellow fish maw, also called yellow flour glue. The same quality was sturgeon yellow sturgeon white flour glue. Different fish had different prices. The more common was yellow flour glue. The longer it was kept, the better it was. Generally, newly made ones were sold for about 400 yuan per caddy. Those that were more than 3 years old could be sold for 1,000 yuan per caddy. Those that were more than 10 years old could be sold for tens of thousands per caddy. Hearing Qi Li's words, Jiang Hai couldn't help but be a little surprised. Even if it was sold for tens of thousands per caddy, it didn't seem very expensive. For an average family, it wasn't something they couldn't afford, although it would be a little painful. Moreover, for a nouveau riche like Du Feynman, tens of thousands per caddy was nothing. This flour glue is said to be made from the darts of Chinese bahaba fish. This pot of soup cost me $7 million. Perhaps seeing Jiang Hai's confusion, Du Feynman shook his head and sighed as he drank the soup. 7 million? Hearing his words, Jiang Hai was a little confused. How did tens of thousands of yuan become $7 million? $7 million was more than $40 million. $40 million for a pot of soup? Alright, this was a real nouveau riche. It's actually from Chinese bahaba fish. This is good stuff. Hearing Du Feynman's words, Qi Li also sped up drinking the soup. Chinese bahaba fish? Hearing what she said, Jiang Hai couldn't help but scratch his head in a daze. He seemed to have heard of this fish before. Before he went abroad, when he was browsing online, he seemed to have seen the price of this fish. It was said that a fisherman in Guangdong province caught this kind of fish and was bought by a rich businessman for 1.7 million. Then he sold it for more than 3 million. At that time, he only thought about it. Later, when he bought the fish to raise, he only considered the fish of the Atlantic Ocean. After all, at that time, he didn't know much about the spirit qi in his body. Now, it seemed like he could kill anything in his way. However, he didn't dare to test it lightly back then. If he lost money, it would be his entire fortune. Unlike now, he didn't panic because he had money in his hands. However, if this fish was really so valuable, then Jiang Hai could consider it. However, Jiang Hai only thought about it now. One had to know that this fish was a second-class protected animal in the country. He and Minister Qin had once said that it didn't matter if it was an unprotected animal or a protected one. They could bring it in at any time. However, this kind of protected fish needed to be considered. Looking at the bowl of soup in front of him, Jiang Hai's mind also became active. What are you looking at? This kind of fish glue is not common. Seeing that Jiang Hai had been staring at the bowl of soup in front of him, Du Feynman waved the bowl in front of him, and then said to him with a smile, "Oh, I'm thinking. Well, forget it. Let's wait until I succeed. By the way, Du Feynman, when did our relationship become so close? Why didn't I know?" There was still half a bowl of soup left in his hand, and he gave it to Chili. To be honest, Jiang Hai was very interested in this kind of fish, but he didn't like to drink this bowl of soup. However, Chili regarded it as a treasure. "Hey, I'm very sad to hear you say that. You Chinese say it well. Strangers the first time, friends the second time, and good friends the third time. This is the fourth time we've met. Naturally, we're friends." Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Du Feynman's eyes lit up. He then smiled and put his arm around Jiang Hai's shoulder and said with a smile, "But the problem is that you're not Chinese. So let's talk about it. I still have a task to shoulder." Looking at Du Feynman, Jiang Hai shrugged and looked at him with disdain. The two of them were about the same age, but there was really a big gap in status. Jiang Hai wouldn't treat Du Feynman as a friend. Of course, he believed that Du Feynman wouldn't either. "You're still so cautious. Okay, I'll tell you." Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Du Feynman also smiled and said, "Of course." The two of them didn't talk in the crowd. Instead, they deliberately went to the balcony on the second floor. There were many bodyguards outside to make sure that their words wouldn't be heard by anyone. Even Chili was left downstairs by Jiang Hai, and their figures were also seen by Minister Qin as they went upstairs. A trace of nervousness flashed across his face. He knew that Jiang Hai and Du Feynman had already started to contact each other. Whether this matter could be done or not depended on Jiang Hai. "The reason why I held this banquet this time was to choose a middleman." After ascertaining that there was no third person, Du Feynman looked at Jiang Hai. His originally enthusiastic face had turned slightly cold as he slowly said, "Don't worry. Middleman." Hearing his words, Jiang Hai frowned. "What does this mean?" Chapter 436. Du Feynman smiled when he saw Jiang Hai's puzzled look. That's right. He wants Jiang Hai to be the middleman. After that, Du Feynman explained to Jiang Hai why he is so close to Jiang Hai. Although Dubai was only a small country, the other Arabian kingdoms were all in the same boat. It could be said that they were bound together for good or ill. This time, Du Feynman not only represented Dubai, but also the other Arabian countries. What do the Arabs produce? Well, apart from the terrorists, the only thing that was successful in producing oil was oil. This was also the foundation of their existence in this world. Their oil was mainly sold to the United States and some European countries. It could be said that although they were rich now, the money was given by the people who bought the oil. In other words, their oil is a buyer's market. If the US and European countries like the UK and France want to buy it, they can make a fortune. If they don't want to buy it, they can just let it rot in their hands. If someone says they want to buy oil, who will not buy it? If the US does not want to buy it, they can just sell it to other countries. But the problem is, do they dare to do it? The Arab royals are rich, but they are not as rich as the US and European countries. This is the biggest problem. They must be prepared for danger in times of peace. Now they need the royals to stabilize the world. But what if they don't need them one day? Thinking about the wars they had fought in recent years, whether it was Iraq or Afghanistan, why did the United States attack them? Why did the US attack them? First, it is because they are using bombs. But North Korea is using bombs every day, and the US does not dare to attack them. Of course, the other reason is because North Korea is backed by Russia and Soviet Russia. But this is only a theory. Cuba is so close to the US, and the US did not attack them even though they are using bombs every day. This is because these countries do not have what the US needs, such as oil. Wars are not fought for reputation. They were fighting for money. At the very least, they had to be able to earn it back after this battle. This was the philosophy of the West. Therefore, Afghanistan was destroyed, and Iraq was destroyed. Of course, all of this had nothing to do with Jiang Hai, and he had no interest in politics. However, Jiang Hai understood Du Feynman's words. It was impossible for these Arab countries to put all their eggs in one basket. But on the surface, they didn't dare to sell oil to Russia, who was the biggest threat to the US government. Therefore, no matter how much the imperial court tried to persuade them, they didn't dare to give in. Because if anyone sold them out and caused a war, with Huaxia's current foreign policy, it was impossible for them to send troops to help. No one wanted to be the second Iraq. Originally, one party was willing to sell, and the other party was willing to buy. This was a very simple matter. But the problem was that America was in the middle. Therefore, Du Feynman needed a middleman. He needed an excuse. Whether he was persuaded or threatened, he needed a middleman to divert attention. He originally organized this banquet to find a middleman. But it just so happened that Jiang Hai came back. Rather than find a middleman who he didn't know, he might as well find Jiang Hai. Moreover, Jiang Hai had $400 million of oil futures in his hands. When he heard his words, Jiang Hai was silent for the first time. The first thought that popped up in his mind was that he shouldn't get involved in this muddy water. He was just an idiot. He didn't have any ambition. If he didn't do well, he would become the pressure point between China and the United States. Jiang Hai would be depressed to death. However, what Du Feynman said next made Jiang Hai hesitate. There were only two words: benefits. The benefits of Jiang Hai being a lobbyist for Huaxia didn't need to be mentioned. Those benefits were still in Penelope's leather bag. To Jiang Hai, those benefits were real. And if he helped Du Feynman would also give him benefits. The benefits were still in two words: oil. Jiang, to be honest, there are very few oil futures in the outside world. But we have a lot of them. If you are the middleman, we can decide how much you want and sell it to you at a fair price. Under the moonlight, Du Feynman looked at Jiang Hai and smiled gently. He knew that Jiang Hai didn't have much resistance to these words. You really are a bastard. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai's heart itched like a cat was scratching it. Thank you for the compliment, but this is politics. Aside from politics, we can still be friends. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Du Feynman smiled and said, for him, this was a profitable deal. I want 600 million oil futures now. If I want more, can I buy more? Looking at Du Feynman, Jiang Hai hesitated for a moment before asking him. Now Jiang Hai only had 600 million in cash. When he sold gems and other things, he earned less than 1 billion, of which 400 million was exchanged for oil futures, and he still had more than 50,000. In addition, he earned more than 300 million from selling cows. Now Jiang Hai still had more than 800 million in cash. However, the Winthrop construction needed to spend $250 million, so Jiang Hai still had 600 million in cash left. These tens of millions were pocket money and couldn't be used. But the 600 million was useless in the bank. Jiang Hai could exchange it for something more valuable. Oil futures were basically a 20% premium in the current market. If he had 1 billion in oil futures, it would be equivalent to making 200 million for no reason. Most importantly, if he couldn't survive, he could seek refuge with some American tycoons. Even if he went to the White House, he would definitely be a guest of honor, with 1 billion in oil futures. Deal, I can sell it to you again. The price is unlimited, but the only requirement is that you can't buy it with others. I'll only sell it to you. Looking at Jiang Hai, Du Feynman chuckled and said, as long as Jiang Hai was willing to be the middleman, not to mention 1 billion oil futures, even 10 billion oil futures would be worth it. Of course, the premise was that Jiang Hai could take out 10 billion. The current Jiang Hai didn't have that much money, but it didn't mean that he wouldn't have it in the future. Of course, the future he was talking about wasn't 10 or 20 years from now. In this world, people were the most unreliable. Du Feynman was so easy to talk to now, but it didn't mean that he would be so easy to talk to in the future, when he and Huaxia had a stable business. It wasn't rare to get rid of someone once they had outlived their usefulness in politics. Therefore, Jiang Hai needed to get the money as quickly as possible. As for how to get it, did it even need to be said? A man couldn't get rich without a windfall, and a horse couldn't get fat without feeding at night. The best way to get Jiang Hai's feeding at night was to sink a ship. He still had the addresses of many shipwrecks in the Caribbean. What others couldn't get didn't mean that he couldn't either. Since there was a first time, there would be a second time, a third time, a fourth time. One ship was worth $1 billion. What about 2, 3, 5, 6, 7, 8? Du Feynman seemed to be certain that Jiang Hai wouldn't have too much money in a short time, so he would let him bleed a little. The conversation with Du Feynman only lasted for half an hour. Then, Jiang Hai left the second floor with him and stepped into the venue on the first floor. As soon as they came down, Minister Qin saw Jiang Hai immediately. Seeing the smiles on their faces, he knew that this matter was likely to succeed. He couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. It seemed that he had found the right person to look for Jiang Hai this time. He couldn't help but walk over excitedly. He wanted to have a private talk with Jiang Hai later to see what the specific situation was. The other two groups of people who were paying attention to Jiang Hai were Zhou Yu and the Yin family. At that moment, the three members of the Yin family were consciously standing in a corner. After entering the room, although they had already noticed Jiang Hai and Qi Li, they didn't have the leisure to provoke them. Instead, they handed out business cards everywhere, hoping to climb up the social ladder. However, it was a pity that people at this level would more or less dislike their family. Originally, they didn't expect to be able to make friends with these bigwigs through this banquet. They were just there to show their sincerity. After giving out business cards, they had a chance to meet. If they asked for favors in the future, it would be easier to talk to them. After giving out business cards for a long time, they finally got everyone's business cards. Of course, Du Feynman, Jiang Hai, and Qi Li couldn't accept them. Now that they saw Jiang Hai and Du Feynman coming down from upstairs together, the three people couldn't help but feel a little jealous. This wasn't some melodramatic novel. Logically speaking, at this time, Zhongwu should be showing off in front of his love rival, Jiang Hai, and stepping on Du Feynman while he was at it. Then, after learning Du Feynman's identity, he would be extremely terrified and get beaten up before being chased out. He would harbor a grudge in his heart. If he couldn't take revenge on Du Feynman, he would use his connections to take revenge on Jiang Hai. Assassinations, hooligans looking for trouble, suppression from the imperial court, and so on. Unfortunately, it was really difficult for these things to happen in the real world. Now, let alone looking for trouble with Du Feynman, even if they were closer to Du Feynman, they would be watched by the bodyguards. Not to mention showing off. As for the three things mentioned at the end, other than looking for trouble with hooligans, it was more reliable. Assassinations and suppression from the imperial court were impossible. After all, who was Jiang Hai now? He was Du Feynman's guest. Even the imperial court asked for help from Jiang Hai. Under such circumstances, it was too late to curry favor with Jiang Hai, not to mention suppressing Jiang Hai. So now, when they looked at Jiang Hai, other than envy, jealousy, and hatred, they had no other thoughts. They didn't dare to make a move. Of course, the person called Jiang Rue in Boston was indeed one of them. However, just because they didn't dare to harm Jiang Hai, it didn't mean that Jiang Hai didn't dare to harm them. Chapter 437. Seeing that you are so happy, you must have done it. Looking at Jiang Hai, who was separated from Du Feynman, Minister Qin walked over to Jiang Hai with a smile and asked in a low voice, "Of course, I'll leave the rest to you and the imperial court." Although this was just a favor, after all, Du Feynman also intended to sell Huaxia's oil, and he was just an excuse. Jiang Hai was not going to let go of this favor, especially when Huaxia didn't know about this. Hearing Minister Qin's words, Jiang Hai also smiled and said softly, "You are really good. The imperial court owes you a favor. What we agreed on will not change. If you need anything in the future, just let me know." Hearing that Jiang Hai had really done it, Minister Qin couldn't help but wave his fist. This time, he had solved a major problem of the imperial court. "Don't wait for the future. I have something to say now." Hearing that Minister Qin was about to leave, Jiang Hai stopped him. "What? Has the situation changed?" Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Minister Qin was stunned for a moment. What does Jiang Hai mean? Nothing has changed, but didn't our conditions say that I can introduce some animals? I want to introduce 3 kinds of animals now. Looking at Minister Qin, Jiang Hai said seriously, "Okay, that's not a problem." Hearing Jiang Hai say this, Minister Qin naturally smiled. "What is this? I heard that we can already breed Yangtze River grenadier fish in our country. So the first thing I want is the fry of Yangtze River grenadier fish. Looking at Minister Qin, Jiang Hai said seriously. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Minister Qin didn't hesitate, because he didn't know how difficult it was to raise Yangtze River grenadier fish. Indeed, there were artificial breeding methods in China now, and there were about 400,000 fish a year. However, 2/3 of them couldn't survive the first month, and the remaining 1/3 required a lot of manpower to take care of. The most important thing was that this kind of fish couldn't be raised in captivity. It was a migratory fish, and it was not easy to cultivate it with the technology of seawater culture. Because of this kind of fish was really difficult to get. Of course, the so-called difficult to obtain mainly depended on the efforts of the higher-ups. In Huaxia, there was nothing that the imperial court could not do. Okay, that's not a problem. I'll check which fish farm has it. I've heard that this thing is very expensive. It's very likely that you'll have to go to Shanghai to get it. But as long as it's available in China, I'll let you take it away. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Minister Qin smiled and answered seriously. If Jiang Hai was only after money, then everything was fine. Well, in addition to Yangtze River grenadier fish, I also want the fry of giant yellow croaker. Hearing him say it so easily, Jiang Hai was relieved. It was difficult for others to raise Yangtze River grenadier fish, but it wasn't difficult for Jiang Hai. He just needed to inject spiritual qi into its body, even if it was only a trace of spiritual qi. And Jiang Hai used water plants with spiritual qi to raise it. How could the fish want to die? It was so difficult. That's not a problem. Compared with Yangtze River grenadier fish, giant yellow croaker was easier to find and cheaper. There were many fry in the coastal area. Moreover, Jiang Hai said to buy it, not that it was free. It didn't matter who he sold it to. As for whether it had been divided, it had nothing to do with Minister Qin. As the higher-ups said, they had to sell it even if they didn't want to. Even if it had been put in the net, they had to take it out and let Jiang Hai take it away. This was the magnanimity of the imperial court. The last one is Chinese bahaba fish. Seeing that there was no problem with the first two kinds of fish, Jiang Hai smiled. This was a good start, so he asked for the third kind of fish. However, Minister Qin couldn't help but frown when he heard this fish, because he knew that although this fish was expensive, it was not easy to sell this kind of fish, because this fish was a protected animal. Well, I can think of a way, but it's impossible to buy it by quantity. At most, we can sell it by the strips. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Minister Qin hesitated and said to Jiang Hai. Hearing what he said, Jiang Hai nodded. He knew that selling by the strips was not a bad idea. Looking at Minister Qin, Jiang Hai asked in a low voice, "How many can you get?" "At most 10. Let me see. If possible, I'll make a population for you." Minister Qin listened to Jiang Hai's words and carefully replied, "Gather a population? This is also an insider's word. Because if a population wants to reproduce, without 3 generations of inbreeding, it needs at least 8 for pairs." Hearing his words, Jiang Hai nodded. 8 is 8, it's better than none. Seeing that Jiang Hai agreed, Minister Qin smiled and immediately left. He still has to report this incident to the imperial court. The Arabian side is willing to sell oil. This is good news. Seeing that Minister Qin left, Jiang Hai also smiled. Just when he was about to eat something again, he noticed a figure sneaking into the venue. Seeing this figure, Jiang Hai smiled and greeted him. "Is it done?" Walking to the side of the figure, Jiang Hai whispered to the man wearing a waiter's uniform. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, this person froze for a moment, then raised his head and laughed self-deprecatingly. "As expected of the boss, you can still recognize me even though I look like this?" Listening to Jiang Hai's words, Azalina's slightly cold voice came from under this completely different appearance. At this time, Azalina didn't look like a woman, not even an Asian. If one looked at her face, they would at most think that she was a handsome young man. She had black eyes, a nose that wasn't as straight, a sharp jaw, and slightly yellow skin. She was about 1.75 meters tall and looked very thin. Her chest was also very flat, and she had a moving Adam's apple. No one would treat her as a woman. However, Jiang Hai was able to see through her disguise at a glance. This was because anyone who was used to eating the meat in his manner would have a familiar aura around them. When he felt this aura, he immediately knew who this person was. Of course, people who only ate a few meals, or even a dozen meals, wouldn't have this aura. Only people who ate every day would have this aura, because this aura was so little that it was hard to notice if one didn't eat every day. Of course, Jiang Hai wouldn't tell Azalina how he found her. It was very cool to maintain a little mystery in front of his subordinates, so Jiang Hai just glanced at her and said indifferently, "It's been solved. On the way back, I'll invite the boss to watch a free fireworks show." Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Azalina chuckled and said slowly to Jiang Hai. Hearing what she said, Jiang Hai also laughed. Looking at the three people who were standing there and trying to integrate into the other circles, Jiang Hai's eyes became cold. At this time, Qili also noticed Jiang Hai and walked over from a distance. In just half an hour, Qili was holding a thick stack of business cards in her hand. To be honest, she was originally in the same position as the Yin family. It was impossible for them to participate in such a banquet, let alone be the main character. This time, the reason why Qili became the main character in these people's eyes and tried to give her business cards was mainly because of one person, Jiang Hai. Among the people present, except for Qili, the Yin family, and Azalina, no one knew who Jiang Hai was. But everyone only knew that Jiang Hai had a relationship with Minister Qin of the Ministry of State Security. At the same time, Jiang Hai was also friends with the organizer of this banquet, Du Feynman Va Muhammad bin Rashid Al Maktoum. One was a high-level official of the imperial court, and the other was a rich man in the Middle East. Being friends with these two people was worth more than 10,000 ordinary rich people and ordinary officials. It was a bit presumptuous to go directly to Jiang Hai, because they didn't know Jiang Hai's name. But it was easy to find Qili. Although the cheese group was not qualified, at least they knew about it. First he would get to know Qili. Then he would give her his business card. As for whether it would reach Jiang Hai's ears, that would be another story. "Phew, I kind of regret coming with you. I've become your secretary." Seeing Qili come over, Azalina deliberately left first to avoid trouble. Qili came to Jiang Hai's side. She really didn't recognize Azalina, but stuffed the stack of business cards into Jiang Hai's hand. Jiang Hai just glanced at it casually. This pile of business cards was really interesting. This was a company director, and this was a department director. Yes, department director. People at the department level were definitely not qualified to come to this banquet. And this so-called department was a department with the word state, not a department in the capital. There was a lot of knowledge in this. If this was a book about business or official career, it would be obvious. These business cards would definitely be very useful in the future. But unfortunately, the main theme of this book was leisure and farming. So these things were really useless. Jiang Hai glanced at the stack of business cards and stuffed them into his pocket. Looking at Jiang Hai's action, regardless of whether Jiang Hai would look at them in the future, at least he accepted them now. This was a good sign for these people. Hearing Qili's complaint, Jiang Hai smiled and said to Qili, "You don't have to accept them if you don't want to." Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Qili couldn't help but smile, and then looked at Jiang Hai with sparkling eyes. "Do you think I'm you? I still have to make a living in China. How about I find a professional manager, and then go to the United States with you?" Ugh, hee. But hearing her words, Jiang Hai was terrified. If they were really husband and wife, then she didn't want to come. Jiang Hai had to let her come. But the problem now was that there was some trouble between them. "Look at how scared you are. For the time being, I won't go." Seeing Jiang Hai's reaction, Qili sighed. It seemed that she still didn't do well enough. But she also knew that she had hurt Jiang Hai's heart before. Now it wasn't so easy to get it back. She had to work hard for this. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference. as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.